Call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 12 of the House of Commons Special Committee on the Canada People's Republic of China relationship. Pursuant to the order of reference of May 16, 2022, the committee is meeting on its study of the Canada People's Republic of China relations with a focus on police service stations. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. For the benefit of the witnesses and members, please wait till I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. And the clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. We appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Let's see, I believe that we have tested, Madam Clerk, all of the connection. Everybody's been tested. And you're all healthy. That's good. So I'd like to now welcome the Honourable Marco Mendicino, Minister of Public Safety. He's accompanied today by Tricia Geddes, Associate Deputy Minister, Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Brenda Lucky, Commissioner, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and David Vigneault, Director, Canadian Security Intelligence Services, CSIS. Minister Mendicino, you have up to 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to present to you and to committee members today. I would like to begin by commending the committee for studying the so-called police stations, which are a suspected vector of foreign activities steered by the People's Republic of China that operate in Canada, as well as other democracies around the world. Mr. Chair, the reports of PRC attempting to enhance its clandestine footprint on Canadian soil reflect two incontrovertible trends. First, that the geopolitical landscape is increasingly complex, with hostile actors looking to disrupt the international rules-based order which has been in place since the end of the Second World War. And second, like other democracies, Canada has increasingly become a target of foreign interference, which is a direct byproduct of the agenda driven by hostile actors whose objective is to undermine our national interests.
Today, I will be presenting the concrete measures that the federal government will be taking to reduce threats of foreign interference. Before doing so, allow me to underscore that Canada has a strong and resilient democracy that is bolstered by a community of national security and public safety agencies that work 24 hours, 7 days a week to protect our institutions. These agencies have at their disposal the resources and tools and technologies that they need to guarantee our national security.
Does not undertake this work alone. Rather, we work collaboratively with other levels of government as well as with key allies in the Five Eyes, G7, and NATO. Together, the whole of government is positioned to assess, mitigate, investigate, prosecute, and report on threats to the Canadian national security. We need to be always vigilant because those threats are constantly evolving and manifesting in different ways, including through state and non-state hostile activities, foreign interference, cyber attacks, threats to the security of our democratic, economic, academic, environmental, and public health institutions. In the face of these threats, the federal government is vigilant, and we are acting. And I'd like to highlight 5 priority areas of our work. First, we have put into place robust measures to protect our democratic institutions, including our elections. We introduced Bill C-76 to crack down on foreign funding from third parties to federal campaigns and candidates. We created the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections, or CITE, as a task force. We created the Critical Incident Reporting Protocol to communicate transparently and impartially with Canadians during elections in the event there is a threat to the integrity of a federal election, and we introduced the Digital Citizen Initiative to promote democracy and social inclusion by building resilience against online disinformation and building partnerships to support a healthy information ecosystem. The site task force looked at the federal elections of 2019 and 2021 and independently concluded that in both cases, the integrity of those elections was not compromised. Deuxièmement, nous avons mis en œuvre.
Secondly, we implemented a strategy and a national action plan for security that led to the launch of the Canadian Cybersecurity Agency. In the 2022 budget, we earmarked over $850 million to enhance Canada's security centre and communications centre capacity for cyber operations and to better protect the privacy of Canadians. Moreover, last spring, I introduced Bill C-26, our new legislation on cyber security, which will help to protect essential infrastructures when it comes to the financial, telecommunications, transportation and innovation sectors.
Introduced national security guidelines for research partnerships to protect the integrity of our academic institutions, backed by a research security center and a $12.6 million investment. The purpose of these guidelines is to integrate national security considerations into the overall assessment of research partnerships. The guidelines require clear information, among other things, with regards to who the researchers intend to partner with, what the researchers intend to research, what additional due diligence will be taken to mitigate if the subject of research involves a sensitive area. In addition to the guidelines, research partnerships are also subject to rigorous admissibility screening and are also required to comply with existing authorities that regulate exports and imports. Fourth, when it comes to protecting our economy, the government vets foreign investments under the Investment Canada Act and has the capacity to reject those deals where they are contrary to our national security. And the government, as you know, is proposing to further augment the authorities under the ICA. We have in place a new national critical mineral strategy which will help to leverage Canada's natural resources in a sustainable way and in partnership with Indigenous peoples. Fifth, and finally, we've also modernized our foreign policy with the Indo-Pacific strategy. This strategy calls for the strengthening of our intelligence capabilities in the region, to enhance our cyber diplomacy, and to deepen our partnership with allies, and is supported by an investment in these particular areas of over $100 million. Within the Indo-Pacific strategy, vis-a-vis our relationship to China, Canada states its commitment to challenge, compete, cooperate, and coexist. Put simply, we will never apologize for defending our national interest. Taken together, this gives the committee an overview of the government's approach to managing threats, including foreign interference. Pour terminer,
in conclusion, I'd like to say a couple of words on foreign governments' activities back home in Canada. Under international law, all representatives of foreign governments in Canada have the duty to adhere to our laws and regulations. All foreign state that would threaten, harass or intimidate Canadians and Canadian permanent residents would have to deal with international regulations. The RCMP is working with the intelligence community and its partners, law enforcement, in order to deal with these so-called overseas police service stations in the Greater Toronto area. Its objective is to ensure that the public feels safe in its own communities. It's about restoring trust and confidence, and to the extent possible, enforcing the law. And
trust, Mr. Chair, is to be transparent. And that is why we have grown the arsenal of national security tools, but we have simultaneously raised the bar of transparency through the creation of NSIRA, NSICOP, and more frequent public reporting by our intelligence agencies. In a similar vein, we have expressed that we will explore ways to further enhance transparency with regards to our fight against foreign interference. All options are on the table, which could include requiring foreign agents to be properly registered. However, we must bring all Canadians along in this discussion as we reform our institutions to be more diverse, inclusive, and free from systemic discrimination, biases, and racism. Ces efforts ainsi que d'autres.
This is an acknowledgement that there is a real threat of foreign interference, which is not static, and we must continue to develop tools at Canada's disposal to address this threat, which is constantly evolving.
Underlined that our national security and intelligence agencies continue to investigate and monitor reports of Chinese overseas police stations in Canada. There will be no tolerance for this or any other form of intimidation, harassment, or harmful targeting of Canadians or individuals within Canada. And Canada will continue to stand for our interests and values both here at home and abroad. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Minister Mentagino. I'd like to welcome new people joining us, Mr. Chang on the Liberal side, and on the Conservative side, we see Mr. Allison and Mr. Lake. Good to see you. Mr. Lake will try and get the proper name because I don't know if you want to be referred to as Mr. Chenis. But we will get on with the questioning tonight, and we will start our first round, 6 minutes each, starting with Ms. Dancho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Thank you, Minister, for coming to speak about this important issue. I think Canadians were rightfully concerned when they first heard reports that there were 3 alleged Chinese police stations operating illegally and certainly in violation of Canadian sovereignty in Toronto. So for the committee, can you provide any information of how many of these police, so-called police stations have been and are operating currently in Canada?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Dancho. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And as I said, I embrace the committee's study of it. I would begin by pointing out that we are deeply concerned with regards to any allegations and reports of foreign interference. And as you have seen, there have been public reports of these so-called police stations. I would point out to you that with regards to the details of the investigation, that this is the subject of ongoing initiatives by the RCMP. And with regards to those details, I would invite you to put those questions directly to the Commissioner.
To the Commissioner, can you provide information to Canadians of how many of these alleged so-called police stations are operating in Canada, have operated previously, and if any of them have been shut down?
Thank you for that question. Do I need to turn this?
Yeah, you got it, Brett.
Thank you for that question. Currently, we're looking at 3 of the police stations in Toronto and 1 in Vancouver. Obviously, we're working with our police of jurisdiction as well as with other Government of Canada national security agencies. We've initiated investigation, and it's led by the Greater Toronto Integrated National Security Enforcement Team, INSET. And so far, the elements of our investigation have been very overt. Marked police cars in members in uniform to cause disruption to the allegations. We've had that visible presence, and that's mostly so that people will see the actions, first of all, because we need more information. So we hoped, and it did occur when we do this, a lot of people come forward to provide information because they see the police in the area dealing with the allegations. The investigation is ongoing, obviously, and can't get into the various details specifically, but we did put out a statement in, I think, October, November, saying that we were actually investigating reports of possible.
Mm-hmm. So, pardon me. So you can confirm that you know the location of these supposed police stations. Is that correct? And that you have RCMP in uniform at those locations causing disruption? Is that the word used?
Well, in the initial instances, we did a disruption by going in uniform with marked police cars to speak with the people involved in those police stations or those locations, because those locations are a legitimate business in the front, right?
Okay. And can you give a timeline of when you think your investigation will conclude of whether these allegations are true, that these are in fact police stations?
They are lengthy. Normally, they're very lengthy investigations. There's a lot of information coming in that we need to go through, and obviously, like I said, I can't get into specific details, but.
Has anyone been arrested or deported, or have any credentials of diplomats been revoked in response to these police stations operating in Canada?
No, if any of that had happened, then I could speak more to it if there was any charges laid, but that is not the case.
So no
far.
charges laid. Perhaps the minister can comment of whether there's been any diplomatic credentials removed from anyone involved from the PRC.
I would echo the response that you got from the commissioner, which is to say that if there are any actions which are taken, then the government will share that information when we can.
Okay, so nothing has been shared, therefore we can conclude that no one's been arrested or credentials removed. Is that correct? Okay. My understanding is the RCMP in the past legitimately has had cooperation with the Chinese police. Is that continuing?
We did have two liaison officers in China. Now we took them out a couple of years ago. We returned one liaison officer back to Beijing, and we work with the Ministry of Public Safety in that country for urgent files of mutual interest, because it's more than just interference. It's a lot of the movement of controlled substances and drugs.
Okay, thank you. Minister, I don't believe anyone from your government, the Prime Minister, any cabinet minister has publicly rebuked the operations of these so-called police stations operating in Canada in clear violation of our sovereignty and international law. Would you like to take this opportunity right now to rebuke the PRC if these so-called police stations are in fact operating on Canadian soil illegally?
Well, I would underline, Ms. Dancho, that the government has always been vigilant and proactive. The commissioner just stated that in one of her previous interactions with foreign agents from abroad. And we will never apologize, as I said during my remarks, for standing up for the Canadian national interest.
Can you provide just with
Excuse
our
me,
last...
Ms. Dancho, you are practically out of time for now. But
All right,
you will
thank
have
you, Mr.
more
Chair.
time later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now go to Ms. Yip for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Minister and Associate Deputy Minister and Commissioner Lucky to our committee. I was first alerted by a concerned constituent who had heard that there was an alleged police station in the riding, and that was back in fall of 2022. He was very worried about foreign interference, harassment of the Chinese community, and the threat to Canada's national security. What would you say to this constituent?
Thank you, Ms. Yip, for bringing that concern to this committee, and it's one that I have heard expressed by a number of our colleagues. I would say to that individual that that the government, and including the many agencies that work within the community of public safety, are there to support Canadians and other individuals within Canada who may have been the target of foreign interference in its various forms, whether it's through intimidation, harassment, any other kind of pressure that is untoward. That is one of the reasons why the RCMP and other law enforcement agencies at different levels do publish hotlines and do publish general email accounts which allow individuals within various communities and diaspora to reach out without there being any pressure on them to do so. And once they do, they are able to provide information in a way that is safe and secure, with the positive reinforcement that we are there to protect them and to protect the community and to protect our national security. And that was one of the things that I alluded to in my introductory remarks, which is that even as we expand our toolkit to protect communities from potential threats related to foreign interference, that we have to bring Canadians along. We have to engender trust and confidence, and so it is equally important that we enhance our transparency and our accountability, which is what we have done by creating NSIRA and SICOP, but equally in the resources and tools that we provide to the community through the RCMP and other police services.
Commissioner Lucky, many people may not speak English or French well. How will you help those of Chinese background who may not speak English well but want to speak to someone in their own language about intimidation or harassment regarding the police stations?
We actually have resources and translation services for when people want to bring forward their concerns in in their own home language. It's really important for us as a police agency, whether we're working with the police of jurisdiction. We have to ensure that we do much engagement to strengthen that trust in the community, because often people are fearful to come forward. So that's in fact why we created a 1-800 number. So if people don't feel comfortable going to, for example, to a police station or fearful, they can call the 1-800 number. We also have an email address that they can send their concerns. That's especially works well. If the person's first language is not English or French, they can write in their language and we can have that translated.
That's good. So that would also apply for residents of Russian and Iranian background?
We always have access to various different translation services. We might not have them if they arrive at the police of jurisdiction, but they do everything possible to make it available as soon as possible.
Minister, what are your thoughts on having a foreign agents registry?
The short answer is that as I have said, there is an intention to begin consultations on the possibility of creating such an initiative. But before we do that, we have to be sure that Canadians understand why it is that we are looking to modernize our toolkit when it comes to protecting against foreign interference. And that means bringing them along. That means engendering trust. That means making sure that the appropriate accountability mechanisms are in place so that we raise the bar when it comes to transparency. The fact of the matter is that even as the geopolitical landscape becomes more complex, we are at the same time reforming our institutions within the public safety and national security apparatus so that they are more diverse, more inclusive, more culturally sensitive. As you have just asked, you're beginning to hear the reflections of those values in the various initiatives which are being rolled out to support the diaspora, who are often the target of foreign interference. So I think we have to keep all options open, including the potential creation of a foreign agent registry. But as we embark on that, I would say two closing things. One, we need to maximize our current toolkit, which we are doing vigilantly every day. And as we expand it, make sure that we bring Canadians along in a way that is transparent.
What is the most important toolkit, what is the most important tool you would suggest or point out to in that toolkit?
All of them. And that's why I took some time to highlight the various initiatives that the Government of Canada has put forward to protect our democratic institutions with the independent panels, so that we can be sure that Canadians are able to exercise their vote in free and fair elections, to make sure that we are putting forward a plan to be vigilant when it comes to our cyber security and critical infrastructure, to be sure that we are protecting our economy and our academic research institutions, and to be sure that we are able to both protect our interests both here and abroad by modernizing our foreign policy, which is exactly what we have done through the launch of the Indo-Pacific strategy, which includes as a core component our approach to managing the complex relationship with China. But we need to be leveraging all of those tools simultaneously so that we can manage, mitigate, and address the threats to our national security, something that the agencies which are represented at this table, I might add, do a very good job of every single day.
Thank you, Minister. It's now over to Mr. Trudell for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to all our guests here in attendance this evening. I know this is a highly complex issue, not an easy one to come to terms with or grapple with. Now, on the weekend, we saw a balloon that was floating above North America from the northwest to the southeast that was travelling with impunity until it went into the Atlantic Ocean and the Americans shot it down. But it was quite striking. We're talking about an American balloon that was crisscrossing our country. and there were no police stations there. A foreign government is now opening police stations in Canada, would you believe? And we've heard that perhaps the Chinese government had funded political candidates, a form of political interference in our elections, a democratic country. We get the sense that Canada is a leaky sieve when it comes to foreign interference. Do you feel that Canada is a leaky sieve, Mr. Minister?
No.
No, I do not. And the reason that I am confident in our institutions that work in the sphere of public safety and security, as well as intelligence, is because, first and foremost, they have the tools at their disposal that they need to address all those kinds of threats, including the threats that you alluded to in your questions. Second, the government is continuing to make investments to bolster their resources and give them all the tools they need, including the modernisation of law enforcement agencies. I referred to the Investments Regulation Act a moment ago in my opening remarks. I myself introduced new legislation to reinforce authorities to protect our critical infrastructure against cyber security. So it's a combination of investments, legislative and administrative tools, as well as conversations and dialogue with all Canadians. Now, at the PROC Committee and the Ethics Committee, there was a study on foreign interference. I believe it's going to start tomorrow, and I think that you've been invited to appear. Will you testify before that committee, Minister? Well, I have a lot of invitations in my inbox at the moment, but I will certainly be considering that. I'm always available to provide testimony on issues such as interference. Now, today, I know that this committee is currently studying the issue of reported police service stations that are being overseen by the RCMP indirectly, and I know that the RCMP's efforts are important in this process of oversight and, if necessary, to carry out an investigation. My next question is for Mr. Vigneault or Ms. Lucky. Mr. Vigneault, we spoke about this a bit before the committee. Spying on Hydro-Quebec. This is Quebec's important infrastructure. It is a crown jewel of Quebec Inc., shall I put it that way. Now, there's a foreign spy that took photos there. We know that that individual was working at the National Research Institute of Quebec and took photos of electric batteries in that establishment, which was conducting research, and we believe that the spy took photos. What was that individual doing there, and how did that individual come to send that information to China? This is incredible, and Quebec and Canada are the standard bearers of green energy, where we have the spotlight on us. So this is not without consequences. Is it possible that China has insinuated itself in other major institutions in Canada and Quebec? Thank you very much for your question. I could give you a two-pronged answer. First, to do with national security and intelligence, and then I'll call on my colleague from the RCMP to discuss the investigation more specifically. Unfortunately, it was not a surprise to see this kind of incident occur. We were clear with Canadians last year and over recent years that economic espionage, among other threats, is something that is of great concern to us. This goes to the sovereignty and prosperity of all Canadians, all Quebecers in future. If our secrets are stolen, well, those secrets allow us to prosper. Also important is the fact that Canada needs to remain competitive and prosperous when it comes to cutting-edge technologies. You referred to green technology, for example. There's also biotechnology, artificial intelligence. There are a lot of places in Canada and Quebec that have centres of expertise, and they have become targets, unfortunately. We at National Security are stakeholders and partners working in close cooperation with them, informing them as to the extent possible with intelligence that we are able to share, with a view to enhancing their resilience. There are concrete examples in the wake of a number of efforts on our part where we were able to put our finger on we were able to hear that certain companies were successful in putting an end to foreign spying and espionage. Now, I'll turn to the Commissioner to deal with the investigation more specifically.
We now move to Ms. McPherson for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to all of the witnesses for being here. Thank you, Minister, for making the time to come. I do understand that you have lots of invitations, so we're grateful that you were able to make this one of your stops. I think like my colleague, Mr. Trudell, everyone in this room is concerned about our security. Canadians, of course, are very, very worried about, hearing things like our elections are at risk, hearing things like, our academic institutions are at risk, that there are police stations operating in our communities, that we have spy balloons that are floating over our communities. This is very worrying for all Canadians, certainly everyone in this room I know. So I have a series of questions for you with regards to the police stations. How have you talked to impacted communities? What does that dialogue look like? How have you made sure that impacted communities are being heard? Because what we've heard within my constituency office and from groups around the country is that they don't feel protected. They don't feel heard. They don't feel that the government is listening and doing things. They're being told to contact the RCMP, and the RCMP tells them to contact their police, and their police tell them to contact the government. And, they're not feeling like the government is taking care of them. So Minister, how do I respond to that? Because what you're telling other members of this committee is that they are being protected, and what they are feeling is that they are not.
Well, I assure you they are being protected by the array of tools and measures that I highlighted during my remarks. But I also take your point that there is a level of anxiety and disconnect at times that is felt by various communities who both because of the historical context and the relationship between our institutions and those communities and all of the institutional challenges that go along with it, as well as the complexity of today's challenges when it comes to national security threats, that the combination of those two factors does create, I think, a degree of concern. Now, in response to that question, what I would offer to you and to the members of this committee is that my office, my agencies, my department are constantly doing outreach. But beyond the ad hoc outreach that we do, we have institutionalized consultations through a variety of forums, including the Cross-Cultural Committee on Security, including through the Transparency Initiative, which is headed by my Deputy Minister, where we seek to reach into communities and invite them to be part of an ongoing conversation and dialogue to break down those barriers. Now, it is not easy. But we have to keep at it because as we address the complexities around the challenges of the threats to national security, we do have to engender trust and confidence, and you can only do that if you are transparent, and these conversations help that.
So what we're looking at, though, is we're looking at transnational repression. We know how complicated that can be. We also have a situation where, from what I can hear from what your statement was, Minister, academic guidelines, guidelines don't really help. Like, that's not going to solve any of these problems. It's like asking nicely, which I'm not sure is the response we should have here. You talk about the foreign agent registry and that it's on the table and you're thinking about it. Well, it does feel like we have had impacted communities tell us that this is a big problem for a very long time. And we are now at a situation where you're considering guidelines. You're thinking about a registry. You're hoping we might be able to move with impacted communities. Does it not seem to you that much of this work should have already been done?
I think it's more precise to say that we actually do have concrete guidelines in place when it comes to protecting our
What if they
our
don't
academic
follow those
institutions.
guidelines?
Well, there are working groups to ensure that there's accountability and rigor when it comes to the application of those guidelines, Ms. McPherson, and I assure you that the government works very closely with academic institutions to make sure that the application of those guidelines is consistent and coherent, so that we are not in any way allowing for a backdoor into our institutions to allow for foreign interference. Now, how do we do that? We use tools, and those tools, as I said in my introductory remarks, probe into who the research partners are, what is the subject matter of research, and the guidelines are actually quite precise in identifying sensitive areas so that there is a strict standard and screening prior to there being that partnership finalized. So those guidelines are in place, they're objective, they're normed, and they do protect us.
If there are funding agreements with the federal government, if the research grants, if those guidelines aren't followed, is that funding being withheld?
Look, I would share any concern about any research partnership that did not apply the guidelines, which is why we have to be vigilant about it, which is why
concern's different, though, than whether or not that funding would be withdrawn.
If the guidelines were not met, it's certainly my expectation that the funding and the research partnership would not be finalized. That's the whole point of having the guidelines. Now, where that doesn't happen, I think there would need to be a review of the partnership, and both me and my colleagues, the ministers of health, as well as at ISED, are always looking at whether or not there's a way in which we can enhance the application of the guidelines. But I would, just to put a finer point on it, clarify, Ms. McPherson, that these guidelines are not abstract. They are not theoretical. They are in place and they are being applied.
I just have one last quick question for you before my time runs out. When you found out, or when you heard the news about these police stations happening in Toronto and Vancouver, did you have conversations with Minister Joly or anyone at Global Affairs Canada?
A brief answer, please, Mr. Minister.
The short answer is yes. I'm in touch with my colleagues all of the time with regards to threats to foreign interference, including on this subject matter.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now to Mr. Chong for 5 minutes or less.
All right. Thank you, Minister. CSIS said in its February 2021 briefing note that, quote, foreign interference is a serious threat to the security of Canada, end quote. They also indicated in that briefing note that, quote, PRC media-influenced activities in Canada have become normalized Chinese language media outlets operating in Canada. The government issued an order, 2022-0183, a year ago, asking the CRTC to review Russia Today's broadcasting license, which led to the revocation of that license several weeks later. But CGTN, China's authoritarian state-controlled broadcaster, is still operating here, spreading disinformation and propaganda and violating international human rights laws. In fact, Financial Times reported about a year ago that they are airing pretrial confessions of, for example, Simon Cheng, a former employee of the UK consulate in Hong Kong, who was tortured to obtain that confession. And that confession was aired on CGTN. As a result, Ofcom, the United Kingdom's equivalent of the CRTC, yanked the broadcaster's license off their airwaves. So why hasn't your government done the same, based on the advice from CSIS, based on the advice from Five Eyes Intelligence, based on what's going on here in Canada? Why hasn't your government issued, under Section 7 of the Broadcasting Act, an order of general application to a new policy that would remove authoritarian state-controlled broadcasters off our airwaves?
Mr. Chong, I would begin by sharing your profound concern about the distribution of any kind of disinformation. But I think, in fairness to you and to the question, this goes beyond disinformation, that if a statement was obtained through torture, that would obviously be contrary to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I would say to you that with regards to decisions that fall within the purview of the CRTC, as you well know, this is an administrative body that enjoys independence, that makes decisions that are based on the merits and the law, and that as a government, we endeavor to respect the independence of those bodies rather than to politicize those decisions.
Okay, well, thank you for that answer, but I just note it was an order from this government, Order 2022-0183, that led to the revocation of RT's license, and I would hope that it doesn't take a war for the government to change its position on state-controlled authoritarian broadcasters on public, Crown-owned airwaves, spreading disinformation and violating international human rights law. I have a second quick question. Reports indicate that CSIS told this government, your government this past fall, that China's consulate in Toronto had targeted 11 candidates in the 2019 election. CSIS also indicated in its briefing notes released to committee, as I mentioned before, that this foreign interference is a serious threat to the security of Canada. It advised the government in its briefing note that, quote, Canada can make use of a policy that is grounded in transparency and sunlight in order to highlight the point that foreign interference should be exposed to the public. But your government, in many respects, hasn't followed this advice. We have been asking about who the 11 candidates are who were targeted in the 2019 election. We have been asking for specific briefings from intelligence before and during elections, and all we get are briefings of general application. Our national campaign team in the last election asked for specific names of candidates that were targeted, and we didn't get that. So we couldn't take action as a political party to stop foreign interference, to ensure that our candidates weren't being subject to this. That's not the case in other countries where, for example, last summer, a year ago, just over a year ago, MI5 went public with an agent of the PRC in the UK Parliament by the name of Christine Lee. She had targeted MPs with hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations. Those names were made public by the Speaker of the House based on MI5's request. Why isn't your government doing the same thing for parliamentarians here so that we can protect ourselves from foreign interference that doesn't rise to the level of a prosecution in law?
Mr. Xiong, I am as concerned as you are about protecting the integrity of our elections. I would provide you with two answers. First, on the specific issue that you raise around the threat that is posed by foreign funding, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, this government has raised the bar when it comes to providing legislative tools to crack down on foreign funding, which could potentially compromise candidates and campaigns in a federal election. I would hope that would be something that you would applaud as a tool to protect the integrity of our elections. But secondly, I would clarify, and I take your point about wanting to see transparency, that is precisely why we created the site task force. Now, that is a task force that is made up of the clerk and deputy ministers from a number of portfolios that are directly implicated in the protection of our democratic institutions. And within the protocol around critical incidents during elections, there are thresholds. And those thresholds are assessed and evaluated not by me and you, who are elected officials, which in my view would be wholly inappropriate given our vested interest in the outcome of those elections, but rather by the non-elected, independent, nonpartisan, professional public service. They make the calls about what can and should be released with regards to any events that implicate foreign interference, and we put our confidence in those officials to make those calls. Now, that does not mean, I would add, that the elected branch of government is not accountable. We are accountable for those policies which we put into place. But that is precisely why the conversation that we are having today at this committee is important. It is not a partisan issue. We do not want to go down the path that we've seen in some other democracies where people start to question our elections. We want to have full faith and confidence in our elections, and that is something that I think we are all united behind.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now go to Mr. Fragaskatos for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all of you for being here. Minister, you spoke a couple of times tonight, first in your opening remarks, and then MP Yip raised the matter as well on a foreign agents registry. In the United States, a registry has been in place since 1938. In Australia, more recent example, 2018, it was put in place. I know that you're giving consideration to the matter, and it certainly deserves it. In your considerations, is there something that gives hesitance, or pause, hesitance or pause on the utility of a registry along these lines?
I wouldn't describe it as hesitation. I think we need to be diligent and thoughtful and inclusive when it comes to bringing all Canadians along in the modernization of the tools and the arsenal that we create for our national security and intelligence communities. And the reason why that is important is, first, there is a historical context when it comes to some communities within this country and their relationship with agencies and the law enforcement community. And that is why we, among other things, are endeavoring to reform those institutions. And I want to commend the agency heads at the table and all of the agencies within my portfolio for their leadership, because they recognize that to deal with the threats to national security, that we need agencies to be inclusive, diverse, culturally sensitive, so that Canadians can have trust and confidence that as we are taking actions to mitigate against the threats to national security, that they believe that we are consistently going to act in the national interest. And the last thing I would say, Mr. Fragiskatos, is that while there is attention to looking at each of the examples of the tools which we may consult on, including the Foreign Agent Registry, I would discourage the members of this committee from quickly concluding that any one of these in isolation will work by itself. And that's why I frequently, and my colleagues frequently, resort to creating a toolbox that is made up of a suite of measures that can be deployed rapidly and transparently.
Thank you very much. We have limited time, so I do want to ask Commissioner Lucky. Commissioner, you said that you said, and we know it, there's a 1-800 number that's in place. And you also talked about the ability of citizens who might not have English or French as their first language to send in a question to the RCMP and it can be translated. My question is twofold. Number one, how is information about the 1-800 number communicated to the wider public so that they're aware of it? And number two, what is the turnaround for providing answers to members of the public that might wish to send in a question in, let's say, Mandarin or Cantonese and have that question translated?
Thank you for that question. The engagement with the public obviously is so important, and so that's exactly why we brought in that number and the email address. And so we encourage people to send that in. How we advertise is through engagement with the community and making sure that in areas where there's groups of community members where we can share that, and through various non-governmental agencies sharing the information, so that when the places that they go to get information for general government programs, that's where a lot of that information is shared. And it's, like I said, it's about building that trust and confidence, because the best information that we can get is from the victim themselves. And if the victim does not feel comfortable coming forward, it really ties our hands. It makes the investigation more difficult. As far as the turnaround, I do not know the answer to that in regards to the turnaround time.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fragiskatos. We will now go to Mr. Trudell for 2.5 minutes or less.
Okay.
Well, the House voted on the 18th of November 2020 in favour of the creation of a foreign agent registry. That's about 2 years ago. So not much headway's been made, and you're kind of walking on eggshells to basically tell us that things aren't advancing. My question is for Ms. Lucky or perhaps Mr. Vigneault. But were that registry to exist already today, would it have helped us to detect these Chinese police stations in order to put a finger on these spies that are working for Hydro-Quebec? Would it have helped us to address the issue of funding of foreign interference in our elections? Would that have helped us take preventative action?
Mr. Trudel, rapidement.
Very quickly, Mr. Trudel, if I may. As the Minister indicated earlier, the threats are evolving and the tools have to evolve with them. So absolutely, yes, this is one tool in the toolbox with a view to transparency. I don't think folks think that it's the only tool that we need at our disposal. That said, those individuals would have to publicly state their affiliation, and that would help with transparency, and it would help to bring people out of the shadows, those who are trying to interfere. It would be more difficult for them to get their hands on resources and to engage in this interference. So yes, it would help to prevent interference in foreign elections, but we have to consider other tools too. Well, personally, are you putting any pressure on the Minister to have this tool made available? Well, I do discuss these kinds of things with the Minister, and sometimes our discussions get a little heated. But yes, in the public sphere, we have talked about the need to overhaul some of our national security and intelligence legislation. We've spoken in a very straightforward manner to the Minister and the Department, and that community can also chime in with its ideas and solutions in order to be not only more effective and efficient, but to ensure that all Canadians feel safer.
Now to Ms. McPherson for 2.5 minutes or less.
2.5 minutes? What will I do with all my time? Mr. Vino, I'm going to ask a question. You were just talking a little bit about security legislation in Canada, and I know that the Foreign Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement, or the FIPA, locked us into a 31-year deal to protect Chinese investments in Canada. And I know that in theory, there is a provision for the Canadian government to block investments due to security concerns. However, of course, it was such a ridiculous mess with regards to Huawei and could in fact take between 5 and 10 years. Do you believe that the FIPA has made it more difficult for Canada to push back on national security threats coming from the Chinese government?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Ms. McPherson, I'm not an expert on FIPA, but what I can tell you is over the last number of years, we have seen how effective the tools under the Investment Canada Act have been to counter investment in Canada that have been or could be detrimental to our national security. There are security provisions in the Act that prevent the disclosure of specific details, but I can tell you there's more and more activity in our organization at CSIS and with the other agencies of the national security community that are looking specifically at those investments. And throughout this period, it has not been the FIPA has not been one of the issues that has been raised to my level to say that it was of concern. But there are other experts in government who may speak in more details.
Well, and I think some of them may be joining us later, so we can ask that again. You did talk about security legislation, though, with my colleague, Mr. Trudel. What security legislation do you think does need to be updated with regards to the Canadian government and how we deal with these crimes?
So we have been quite open about the fact that the CSIS Act was created in 1984. At a time when we're talking about analog technology, when the threat environment was during the Cold War, so very different. And so the world has evolved, unfortunately, going in the wrong direction in many points of view regarding Canada's national security. And our effort has been to generate a mature discussion with the government, with Canadians, to make sure that more people are involved. That's why, for example, CSIS and I personally have been engaged in making more public speeches, engaging with communities like universities, business sector, marginalized communities, to essentially talk about the fact that national security in our country should not be a zero-sum game, that we should be able to have both the right tools and the right legislation to protect Canadians, while at the same time protecting their privacy and their security interests. So that has been the focus of our efforts.
And you're not sure that we have that in place right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. We'll now go to Mr. Janice for, Michael's going to take this, all right?
Yeah, I'm going to share some time with my colleague MP Dancho. Just Minister, to follow up on this site task force that was established. You know, its primary purpose is intra-governmental coordination. It's not a decision-making body. Each constituent entity of the task force is responsible for making its own decisions and its own communications coordinated through the normal process during the writ through PCO. The problem with this task force is that it doesn't tell political actors, it doesn't tell parties, candidates, if there is a threat going on during the election. Clearly, CITE was monitoring interference in the election that was targeting MP Kenny Chiu. They highlighted that in their documents that were released months later. But MP Kenny Chiu had no idea, the candidate Kenny Chiu had no idea that this was taking place. And so, you know, again, there's a lack of transparency in informing political parties, candidates, MPs about the threats that we're facing. We get these general briefings of general application, and we're never told if we're the target. I very well could be a target. I want to know if I'm a target. I want to know that. And that's the kind of information that the government is failing to provide to parties, candidates, MPs, that other democracies are doing as a best practice. As CSIS has highlighted, you know, that sunshine and transparency is one of the tools available to the Government of Canada to counter foreign interference, because a lot of this stuff doesn't rise to the level where it can be prosecuted through law. And so the only tool we have is transparency. But if we're flying blind and we don't know who the 11 candidates are, if we don't know who's being targeted, we're not going to be as effective as we could be and as some of our allies are.
I would just say in response that you raise a number of very legitimate concerns, particularly with regards to the initiating of criminal proceedings against those who would attempt to engage in foreign interference. And, you know, having spent some time in the criminal justice system, I recognize fully that there is an ongoing challenge around the transitioning of intelligence into evidence that is admissible, that can be used and adduced to prove the types of offenses which would bring those individuals responsible for that conduct to justice. So I take your point on that. And in addition, look, I embrace the conversation around how those decisions are made, around how much is shared and when. And as I said, the elected branch of government is there to work with our public service to inform their discretion during elections.
With respect, those entities, the agencies, the departments, the boards, the commissions, they have to go through communications protocols of the Government of Canada, which, as we know, in this town is an information desert. We don't get told anything. And so it's going to require direction from the cabinet to the constituent bodies to indicate to them that they are free to relay this information to parties, to candidates, and to MPs. And that's what needs to happen. Thank you.
I would submit that in the context of CITE and the protocol around critical incidents, that they have that unfettered discretion. The extent of Cabinet's direction is in the protocol. That's done in consultation with the independent public service. But once we're into the writ, they exercise that discretion. And you don't want, and I would underline this again, Mr. Chung, for you or I or any party to start to pierce behind that veil, because it is a slippery slope. And I would just point out that, yes, we do have to, constantly reassess whether or not the transparency bar is being met. And again, I embrace that conversation, but those decisions should be undertaken by our public servants once we're talking about elections.
And I'm not suggesting we release information injurious to national security. What I am suggesting is that if 11 candidates were targeted in the 2019 election, surely the parties involved and the candidates involved should have been informed of that. And going forward, I would hope that would be the case in order so that we can take action, particularly for measures that don't rise to the level of something that could be prosecuted under the law, whether it's the criminal code or other non-criminal law. Thank you. Mr. Chair, that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chung. I want to remind everybody, we will have one more round, so each, you'll have 2 more 5-minute slots, as will the Liberals, and then, of course, the 2.5 minutes for our Bloc and NDP friends. So for the final 5 minutes in this round, we will go to Mr. Dubourg.
I see some jockeying back and forth between my colleagues and the Conservatives. You can stay for another minute if you'd like. That'll help ease the pressure.
Great.
I'm trying to. Oh, there you go. Okay.
OK. Ben alors.
Bipartisanship. Mr. Dubourg.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to the Minister for allowing us to ask him more questions with a view to transparency. Mr. Chairperson, I'd like to welcome the witnesses here in attendance this evening for this study. And right off the bat, I'd like to ask my first question of the Minister. I'd like to get a handle on your understanding of the issues, Minister. As members of Parliament, as elected officials, in many situations and contexts, it might be perceived that we are being followed or targeted. As members of the Canada-China Committee, I'm sure there are folks from abroad who have singled us out. I was a member of the NCCOP committee myself, the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, and by virtue of the fact of being a member of this committee, there are groups of foreigners who have taken a particular interest in members of the NCCOP committee. Should we make a distinction between targeted and threatened? I presume that were one of the members of one of those committees to be threatened, well, that would represent a real and genuine threat, and that those members would be informed of such a threat.
Monsieur Dubourg, vous avez beaucoup.
Mr. Dubourg, you're right to a large extent. The fact of the matter is that many members in the House of Commons, as well as elected officials from other legislatures, including the municipalities, are targeted by hostile actors. So one has to remain always vigilant in the face of such threats. And it is for that very reason that our intelligence and security agencies, the representatives of which are beside me this evening, are there to use their tools in order to address those threats. Now, at the same time, you said that there are stereotypes, there are stigmas that apply to communities, certain communities of Canadians, particularly racialized ones. And that is precisely why we have to move ahead with reforms. It is included in my mandate letter from the Prime Minister of Canada, moreover. And I have commissioned the services and the RCMP's efforts to work hand in hand with the government with a view to taking the efforts that are required and to restore Canadians' confidence as we modernise our toolbox. My next question is for Mr. Vigneault, says Mr. Dubourg. As far as CSIS is concerned, and this is the same line of questioning in a sense, were your service to detect a threat? Does the law prevent you from communicating that information to the RCMP in a preemptive and preventative way? Thank you very much, Mr. Dubourg, for the question, and Mr. Chairperson, through you. Now, it depends whether it's a threat against an individual, to their integrity, to their physical person, an immediate threat. Of course, we'll work with the RCMP. There's no issue with that whatsoever from a legal standpoint. However, when the threat is more diffuse, when it is, how should I put it, a long-term threat, if you will, we can call on certain authorities or use certain authorities threat reduction authorities in order to communicate with certain individuals and obtain specific information, and sometimes information of a more general nature. So there are processes that are in place. But rest assured, Mr. Dubourg and members of the committee, that we do pass on important information to the relevant services. Now, my final question is directed at Ms. Lucky. You said in your opening remarks, and we're fully aware that there is an investigation underway when it comes to these police service stations. Can you tell us, do you know of individuals that were approached or even intimidated by people from these police station services? And have you been in contact with those individuals to get more information? Thank you for the question. That is precisely why we visited those police stations in our uniforms, in marked vehicles. We wanted to be highly visible, such that the community would see us undertaking specific action, taking specific action at these police service stations. And, of course, we have published the 1-800 number and email address so that Canadians can write in and call. We've gotten a lot of information thanks to that, and we'll be using that information to lay charges in due course when we reach that stage of the investigation.
To our next round, and we'll begin with Ms. Dancho for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. One follow-up question for the Commissioner, perhaps the Minister can answer. You mentioned that we have one RCMP officer in China. How many Chinese police officers do we have operating in Canada?
That's a good question. We do, obviously, in the embassy, they have, I don't think they have any actual police officers, but they do have people in the ministry. But I'd have to double check on that. Yes.
To the committee. And I just had a follow-up, but if we don't know if there are any formally operating, within the bounds of our diplomatic agreements, as we have one operating in China, just concerned about if there are any, how can we be sure they're not engaging in Operation Fox Hunt, which, as I'm sure you know, is sort of a global covert operation run by the Chinese in foreign government, in foreign countries, looking to sort of root out any dissidents of the PRC. Can you just outline just briefly if you have any knowledge of this, and if there's anyone from China operating under that auspice in Canada?
There hasn't been recently any files recently opened under Fox Hunt, but we have had incidents in the past, and those are all followed up succinctly. Any of the people that would come from China, as far as the government, would be situated in Ottawa only. And again, it's to beyond foreign interference, it's of course the movement of contraband.
Okay, thank you very much. To the Minister, regarding the spy balloons, my understanding is the Canadian people did not find out about the spy balloon from your government. It was actually from the American news agencies. Their government, the American government, told the American news agencies very transparently. So Canadians actually found out about the spy balloon that was over Canadian sovereignty for several days, not from your government, and not from a Canadian news agency, but from an American one. Do you find that acceptable?
First, Ms. Dancho, as you well know, when it comes to the briefings that the government receives from our national security and intelligence community of agencies, that there is a lot of regard to first being careful and cautious around when information is released, so that we do not in any way jeopardize either the integrity of the operations which are being undertaken to protect national security, as well as the people who are engaged in those operations. And that is a matter of the utmost sensitivity, as you can appreciate.
Do you find,
but when we
just on that, Minister, do you find then that the American government doesn't have that same commitment to national security as you've said? I mean, they did share, again, they shared the information with their people long before, or before you shared it with us.
I'm glad you added that qualifier. But I would just say, I mean, you allude to the cooperation between Canada and the United States. Canada and the United States were stitched up on this particular event. We shared intelligence. We shared and coordinated our efforts. And as you heard my colleague, Minister Anand, say, we fully supported the United States' actions in bringing down
are you aware
one
of
of those balloons.
other spy balloons that have been over Canadian territory?
What I would say to you and to the members of this committee is that we are always vigilant around potential threats to our airspace, to our sovereignty, and to our national security.
It's a non-answer. Can you commit to this committee that you will be more transparent, or that you'll be the first to deliver the news in the event that this happens again, unlike a few days ago when we had to wait for American news outlets to confirm it?
The government will always share and be transparent when it can without in any way compromising our classified information, the people who work in these agencies, or the integrity of the operations, which are there to protect the national security and the Canadian people.
Did your government have intentions to release this information at any point, or did you just confirm it because the Americans did? Would your government have released this information if the Americans chose not to?
We are always transparent as quickly as we possibly can be, having regard to the sensitivity of the operations that are undertaken to protect our national security.
But you can't tell me if this has happened before. You can't explain why you weren't the first to deliver the news to Canadians, and you can't commit if you're going to tell us if this happens again. That's what we're seeing in this committee today, Minister.
The government will always be transparent as soon as we can be when it comes to our national security.
Minister, respectfully, that is not transparent. I think it's a definition of not being transparent by not sharing this information with the public. That's the opposite of transparent.
Well, we have shared information. We have coordinated with our allies. I would argue that the timing in which we made that information available was generally contemporaneous to the events themselves, and we'll continue to share information without compromising either the classified nature of the information that we receive, because we've got people who are in the line of duty. There are lives at stake. There are techniques at stake. This is complex stuff, as you well appreciate, Ms. Dancho, and we are upfront with Canadians as soon as we can be.
Were there lives at stake?
Excuse me, Ms. Dancho, your time has expired.
He can probably answer that. Were there lives at stake as a result of this spy balloon? It's quite significant that he mentioned
Very quickly.
We have people who are in the field who work in a wide range of agencies, including in the Canadian military, and yes, every day they put their lives at stake to protect our national interest.
We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less.
So, Mr. Chair, we'll give my time to my colleague and our guest for tonight, Mr. Chang.
Then Mr. Chang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Cormier, to allow me to use your time. Mike, I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing tonight in front of this committee. And my question is directed to Commissioner Lackey. As you know, we've been talking about the police stations in Canada, the apparent Chinese or alleged Chinese police stations in Canada. 3 of them in the GTA, and 1 of them is in my riding of Markham Unionville. And the concerns I have in regards to this is I have a constituents base of 66% of Chinese origin that are in my constituency. And the concerns that my constituents have for this issue, they've been coming to me and asking me for help on this. And I want to find out is something being done? You know, we do know these places do exist. And as you have mentioned that you had uniformed police officer go there, but has anything been done to prevent any foreign interference? And what safety precaution would they be for our residents?
Thank you for that question. Obviously, engagement with the public is one of the first things that we need to do, because our goal is to ensure that the public feels safe in their own communities, and building that trust and confidence where possible, and enforcing the relative legislation or disrupting those activities. And like I said, because of the investigation is ongoing, and we have to protect the methods and the techniques that are used in the investigations and safeguard the witnesses, possibly in personal or sensitive information. We don't get into the specifics. What I can say is that there is an investigation opened in the 4 police stations that have been identified in Canada. And I would add this. Obviously, there's 4 in Canada, but this is actually, we work with our Five Eyes partners and other partners of law enforcement across the world, because this is bigger than just 4 police stations in Canada. There's several in and across the world. So we try to look at similarities. We share the information to see if there's any connections with other similar countries. We work with the police of jurisdiction in Canada, because not only do we have to provide awareness and education for the people who could be victims, there's also education and awareness for police, because most of this is not in RCMP jurisdiction. It's in big municipalities where we need to make sure that police can identify the signs for, in advance for potential disruption or potential foreign interference. And we did a lot of that, especially in and around the elections, to describe what some of that interference might look like, and for them to be in tune to that so that they could report it.
Thank you, Commissioner. In follow-up to your answer, do you have a timeline, since it's an active investigation, as you have mentioned? Is there a timeline when you'll be concluding, or?
No, they are quite complex investigations, but what I would do is I would encourage any of the people that are coming to you or that don't feel safe, if they're obviously in immediate danger, that they should call 911. But if they aren't and they would like to share information, that's the best way that we can take these investigations to fruition, instead of just simply disrupting the activity. If we can bring that to charges, which is also a sign of success. But we need information from the public, but they need to feel safe, right? So we have to make sure that we provide a venue where they can feel safe.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. We'll now go to Mr. Trudel for 2.5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Ms. Lucky, I think it goes without saying that these police stations in Toronto are conducting espionage, and particularly with regards to the Uyghur. What steps are you taking to ensure that Canadian citizens who are human rights advocates, to prevent them from being sent back to China? What steps are you taking?
Well, of course, when we're dealing with this, these are allegations. So, of course, we have to gather up the evidence from sources. There's lots of intelligence coming in, and Director Vigneault spoke about sometimes the intelligence. Turning that into evidence is not always easy in our judicial system, so that is part of our challenge. But we do take those threats seriously and see CACN
And if someone is in danger, or if somebody
sent home, we need to know that. We're going to investigate that, and we need to get.
Are there any investigations of those people? Do you carry out investigations? Do you meet with them? Do you interrogate them, question them? Yes, absolutely. We do meet with them to the extent possible, and that's why we publish the 1-800 number, so that they can communicate information to us, and if they wish to remain anonymous, they can do so. We can take a statement that could be used thereafter in our investigation. To your knowledge, are there any Canadian citizens who are human rights advocates who have been sent back to China, that the Chinese government was successful in repatriating and perhaps putting behind bars? Do you have any figures on that? Not to my knowledge, not recently at least. I don't have any figures on that either, but there are no police files to that effect.
McPherson now, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to all of the witnesses for being here today. Commissioner Lucky, I'm going to ask you just a couple questions if I could. You've spoken about the 1-800 number that has been set up. How many people have called that number?
I don't have that number in front of me.
Do you have access to that number? Do you know if it is being actually utilized by the community?
I know that when we went in like I said, in uniform with our police vehicles, shortly thereafter, that visibility allowed more information to come in either at the police of jurisdiction, the 1-800 number, or via the email.
I would like you, if you could, provide the committee afterwards. Maybe you'll have to get some of those numbers for us, but if you could provide those numbers of how many people have accessed that 1-800 number, I think that would be quite useful for us to know whether it is an effective tool. But I also am recognizing that you're talking an awful lot about gathering information. You're talking a lot about how important it is to get the information, to have that for the investigation, but I'm not hearing how that's translating into protection for people that are impacted by communities that are impacted. Like I said earlier, I've heard many times from many people from the Uyghur community, the Hong Kongers across Canada, that have been threatened, that have tried to reach out to their local police. Their police have not been trained. They have not had the tools to do the job to protect people. They have not been given solutions. The RCMP has not gotten back to people. So I understand that you're gathering a lot of information, but what are you doing to make sure that actively, not in the future, not after the case is done, but actively, how are you protecting Canadians that are being impacted and other people that are being impacted?
Well, in most of those areas, those are the big municipalities, it's up to the police of jurisdiction to provide safety within their communities. For the RCMP, our role is to gather the information, but we have to make sure our engagement with the public, we have to make sure they feel safe to bring that information forward so that we can initiate an investigation.
So you feel that the RCMP's role is just gathering the information then?
No, it's doing the investigation. And so that's why it's important for people to bring the information to us so that we can initiate investigation and complete the investigation with a goal
But with all due respect, you don't have the numbers of how many people have come to you with the information.
Well, I don't have that at my level, but there are people who have used that phone number, and we will, like I said, follow up on every investigation, make every lead that we get. These are complicated investigations. They're not as straightforward as one would think.
Well, no, and I don't think anyone in this room expects that they are not complicated.
Ms.
But I do think we
McPherson.
need to do more to protect Canadians that are being impacted.
Commissioner Lucky, I do hope that you do follow up with the request for statistics. Thank you for that. We'll now go to Mr. Genos for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair. It's great to be back at this committee. Minister, were or are foreign diplomats involved in the operation of these so-called police stations?
I can appreciate the question and your desire to get an answer to it. I would defer to the Commissioner of the RCMP, who, as I said at the outset, and I don't know if you were here for my opening remarks or not, Mr. Genos, is carrying on an active investigation. Okay. So I want to be respectful of operational
I've got limited time,
independence.
so just quickly to the Commissioner, foreign diplomats involved in the operation.
I can't give you any of the information regarding the investigation.
Okay, all right.
Methods.
Okay, thank you. Minister, in general, are there any foreign diplomats engaged in inappropriate interference activities here in Canada?
Again, I would point out that we get briefings all the time with regards to potential threats that involve foreign interference, but for obvious reasons, when it comes to active investigations or operations, I would defer both to my colleague at CSIS, the director, Mr. Vigneault, or the RCMP.
Okay, but if a diplomat were expelled, you would be able to comment publicly on the reasons for an expulsion?
Well, declaring someone inadmissible and expelling a foreign agent are legislative authorities and equities that are exercised by my colleague, the Minister for Global Affairs. There may be some cases where, for reasons pertaining to national security, that there's some of that information that makes its way into the public domain and some that does not. But we endeavor to be as transparent about those decisions as we can be.
Okay, so in endeavoring to be as transparent as possible, I'm sure the minister seeks your advice on issues of security involving diplomats. How many in the last 8 years? How many foreign diplomats have been expelled?
Let us get back to you on that.
Okay. You'll provide an answer to the committee? How many have been expelled on the basis of interference concerns?
Let us get back to you on that.
Okay. Chair, I'll look forward to that update. When did you become aware of the so-called foreign police stations here in Canada? When did you first become aware?
I would have been briefed sort of consistently on a variety of threats to foreign interference. And look, these
When
briefs
did you
are-
become aware of that specific one?
Well, again, with regards to the police stations, I would say to you that certainly within the last year.
Did you become aware of it before or after it was reported in the media, or at the same time?
I can't tell you off the bat exactly when media reports first surfaced about this, but I would say to you that I've been briefed within the last year.
Well, it's not a complicated question. Like when you saw the story in the news, were you surprised by it, or did you say, "Oh yeah, this is something I knew already that has now made its way into the media"?
Yeah, no. What I'm saying to you is I don't recall, and I don't know that you have the date that these reports first surfaced.
Well, I wasn't receiving briefings about them from the department.
You were referring to the media reports, though, right?
So I first became aware of them through the media reports. I'm wondering when you first became aware of them as minister. Was it before or after the media reports? And you're telling me you don't remember whether it was before or after the media reports that you became aware of them?
I'm saying I became generally aware of this particular subject matter within the last year.
Before or after the media reports?
Well, that's the part that...
you don't remember?
I don't remember when they first became publicly reported in the press. No.
Could you provide an update to the committee on that?
Happy to do that.
Thank you. In your view, is there any instance where it is appropriate for Canadian institutions to be cooperating on any matter of research with Chinese military institutions?
Yeah, that too is a very important question. We touched on it earlier, Mr. Ginnis, when I was answering Ms. McPherson's questions about research guidelines.
I saw your statement, but just very specifically, is there any instance where you think it would be acceptable for Canadian institutions to collaborate with Chinese military institutions?
I think given the sensitivity of that particular subject matter, that there would need to be a very, very strict standard, and it's hard for me to conceive of a scenario. But again, these decisions are taken independently by the academic institutions and the research partnerships, and those guidelines are there.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if you provided clear advice. I've got 30 seconds left. I want to get in one last question. Following Mr. Chong's questions about CGTN, noting the directive you issued on RT, is the government considering issued a directive regarding CGTN similar to the directive issued for RT?
Well, as a matter of first principle, and you heard my answer to Mr. Chung, those are decisions which are typically undertaken
almost out of time. Are you
these,
considering issuing a directive, though?
I was endeavoring to complete the answer.
But it's
to
a yes
your
or no
first question.
Are you considering issuing a directive?
We endeavor to respect the independence of the CRTC, which is an administrative tribunal that makes those decisions. We'll always, take decisions consistent with that principle.
But you issued the directive with RT, right? So was that consistent with the principle of respecting its independence?
And where appropriate, we will look to other potential decisions. But
so are you considering that in this case, though?
Gentlemen, I hate to interrupt, but you are both out of time on this round of questioning. Thank you. There you go. We'll now go to Mr. Chang, and I believe you're going to share your time with Mr. Cormier. And who is going to lead, you or Mr.
I will.
Cormier? All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
5 minutes or less.
5 minutes? Thank you. I'm going back to, by the way, thank you for allowing me to be here tonight, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to go back to Commissioner Lucky, since we are talking about the police stations, the alleged Chinese police stations here. Again, my concerns is for my constituents. And they have been ample clear to me in regards to these police stations, and they're fearful for their safety. And in your professional view, because they're looking at it as being a police station, but in your professional view, is this considered a police station, or are they just a front for something else?
Obviously, in the media, thank you for that question. In the media, they've referred to them as police stations. For ourselves, it's any place that is causing, interference or intimidation, harassment to individuals in any form, whether it's and it's not a police station that you would, how we define a police station. In some of these cases, it could be as simple as a room behind a commercial retail store. So it's not what we call police stations. I think the reference is probably because of I'm not even sure why the reference is, but we have to make sure that, your constituents and all Canadians feel safe. So it's important that if they are directly threatened, first of all, they have to call 911. We don't want to see anybody get hurt because of any interference, harassment, coercion, interference. And if it isn't an urgent matter and they feel safe to come forward, if they don't feel safe, maybe they feel safe coming with their member of parliament or somebody, or even if we start off by getting the information through another source so that they can feel safe. But that's exactly why when Ms. McPherson was talking about the runaround that some people are getting, that's exactly why we created the 1-800 number and the email address, so that people could have that one spot to report if they felt, because we are educating the other police of jurisdiction, but sometimes they don't have the specialized expertise in foreign interference that our members of the RCMP have.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And through these investigations, has there been any other location been discovered?
No, so far to date, there's been 3 in the Greater Toronto Area and 1 in Vancouver.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I concede my time to Mr. Cormier.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Perhaps this question has already been addressed, but it's always great to get answers in questions if possible. I saw in Ireland and the Netherlands that these so-called police stations have been shut down. How did they go about doing that in those countries? Did they proceed by investigation like we're undertaking in Canada? Did it take months? Did it take years? What process was undertaken in those countries when they ordered the closure of those so-called police stations? Anyone can take a stab at that question, please.
I don't know the specifics of the investigations that you're referring to, but what I can say is that, of course, we have to meet the threshold of our criminal code. If, in fact, we are going to lay charges, we have several criminal code offenses that can be leveraged, such as breach of trust, criminal harassment, unauthorized use of a computer, fraud for obtaining trade secrets, intimidation, mischief, bribery of officers, and then we have a whole suite of allegations or charges that can be laid under the Security of Information Act offenses, such as unauthorized communications, communicating of safeguarded information, use of trade secrets. This is all specific charges for various types of foreign interference. And of course, we have to meet the threshold of the evidence in order to bring somebody to court. And shutting them down, I will say that police culture is often our success is by charges laid, but disruption as well, because we haven't heard very many new complaints on those 3 stations in Toronto and the 1 in Vancouver as a result of the disruption that we have done with those particular locations.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. Not very much time left for a follow-up question. I want to thank our panelists, Minister Mendicino, Commissioner Lucky, Ms. Geddes, and Mr. Vigneault. You've been very generous with your time this evening, and we thank you for that. We'll take a quick break while we get our second panel in place. In the interests of making sure we have enough time for questions before our allotted time runs out, we will commence with our second panel. And joining us now is Adam Fisher, Director General, Intelligence Assessments, the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service. We have Sébastien Albertin Giguère, Assistant Deputy Minister, and Leslie Soper, Director General, National Security Policy, Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. And then Brigitte Gavin, Acting Director General, Federal Policing, National Security, and Matt Peggs, Chief Superintendent, Criminal Operations Officer of O Division, Ontario, of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I understand we will have opening statements from Mr. Fisher and from Ms. Gauvin. So we will start with Ms. Gauvin for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable Chair, committee members. Monsieur le Président et honorable membres.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
The issue of foreign interference today concerning the allegations of police stations, which are allegedly affiliated with the People's Republic of China and operating in Canada. My name is Brigitte Gauvin, and I am the Acting Director General of the Federal Policing National Security Program. I am accompanied by Matt Peggs, the officer in charge of criminal operations in O Division, which is in Ontario, where the RCMP is responsible for federal law enforcement. The study of this issue is important from a law enforcement perspective, and the RCMP takes this very seriously. While I cannot discuss precise details of ongoing investigations, I want to assure this committee that the RCMP may leverage criminal offenses to investigate potential threats to public safety involving a state actor, including criminal code offenses such as intimidation, criminal harassment, uttering threats, and also specific foreign influence threats of violence or violence offenses under the Security of Information Act. Today, I'll focus on explaining 3 specific concerns from a law enforcement perspective. First, why is foreign interference, including the activities allegedly connected to the police stations, a problem? This is because the foreign interference threat is multi-layered. It can range from students being pressured to support activities that are favorable to a foreign country, to the theft of intellectual property, or the coercion of an individual. The common thread between each of these foreign interference-related activities is that they are clandestine, deceptive activities that may involve threats to a person and are detrimental to Canada's interests. The state-backed harassment and intimidation of Canadian communities is no different, as foreign actors seek to benefit another country by limiting certain dialogue and messaging in Canada. There is a collective concern on this topic, which has been expressed both domestically and internationally. This is not only because these alleged police stations have been reported to be operating in the Greater Toronto Area, but also reportedly around the globe. This is concerning for several reasons. These alleged police stations may contribute to the involuntary return of individuals to China. Also, families living in both China and Canada may become the target of harassment, intimidation, or experience other negative consequences. And if these activities of these alleged police stations are consistent with those reported by safeguard defenders and the media, they would be operating outside of existing Canadian legal mechanisms. Second, how is the RCMP responding to the alleged police stations issue? And how is the RCMP countering foreign interference more broadly? The RCMP has a specialized team dedicated to countering foreign interference. The ultimate goal is to ensure that the public feels safe in their own communities, building trust and confidence where possible, enforcing relevant legislation or disrupting activities. We are working directly with the community, our domestic and intelligence law enforcement, security and intelligence partners, and other Government of Canada partners on this issue. Our efforts include investigating, preventing, and disrupting foreign interference, and we use the knowledge gained from our strategic and criminal intelligence functions, as well as our collaborations with our partners, to adapt to the criminal methods used by foreign actors. As mentioned, I cannot share specific details about the RCMP's investigations, and this is because the investigations are ongoing, and foreign interference investigations are some of the most sensitive national security investigations the RCMP currently conducts. Third, and finally, I will explain how the Canadian public can assist in countering this activity. We encourage the public to report state-backed harassment and intimidation, as this will allow us to investigate and assist the RCMP in creating a more complete picture of the criminal threat environment. The local police of jurisdiction are typically the first to learn of a foreign interference-related issue. The RCMP works closely with its law enforcement partners, including police of jurisdiction, to respond to these state-backed threats. If someone is in immediate danger, 911 or local police should be contacted. If an individual is not in immediate danger, the RCMP's National Security Information Network may be contacted by phone or email. In conclusion, I would like to re-emphasize that the RCMP is taking this situation very seriously. This is a nationwide and global issue. The alleged police stations rightly concern Canadians. We share these concerns. Thank you for your time today. Je vous remercie de m'avoir accordé du
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Acting Director General. Now we'll go to Director General Adam Fisher for 5 minutes or less.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames.
Mr. Chairperson, members of the committee, good evening. My name is Adam Fisher, and I'm the Director General at CSIS of Intelligence Assessments, and I'd like to begin by thanking you for inviting me to come before you today to speak with you, and it'd be my pleasure to respond to all of your questions on this study.
Been noted, the case this committee is studying is under close investigation by the RCMP. While I am sure you will appreciate that I cannot get into specifics in order to protect our sources and methods, CSIS endeavors to support our partners to the best of our abilities across all manner of foreign interference investigations. CSIS investigates and provides advice to government on threats to the security of Canada, such as foreign interference. We take any allegation of foreign interference seriously and have several long-standing and emerging foreign interference investigations across Canada today. As always, close alignment with the RCMP on national security matters is critical. Foreign interference is covert and malign activity undertaken by a foreign state to advance its national interests to the detriment of Canada's. These activities threaten Canada's democratic institutions, policy process, economy, communities, and free press. Foreign interference can take multiple forms. Threat actors may attempt to elicit sensitive information from those they perceive to have access and influence, cultivating relationships with these individuals over a very long period of time. Threat actors may aggressively threaten or coerce their targets into acting in a certain way. This is a common activity impacting Canada's diverse communities. Other techniques include illicit financing, cyber attacks, espionage, and disinformation campaigns. A number of foreign states engage in these activities. For example, China's attempts to threaten and intimidate individuals around the world have been well reported in open sources. To be clear, the threat does not come from the Chinese people, but rather from the Chinese Communist Party and the government of China. Their activities can instill fear and silence dissent in Canadian communities and communities around the world. La lutte contre l'ingérence étrangère nécessite.
Countering foreign interference requires a whole-of-Canada approach. Those threatened often lack the resources to defend themselves or are unaware that they can report these activities to Canadian authorities, including CSIS.
Ending of the threat. We have prioritized outreach and engagement with communities across Canada to build awareness and resilience. Last year, for example, CSIS's Foreign Interference and You publication outlined in several languages concrete ways that Canadians can defend themselves against foreign interference. Our goal is to strengthen individual resilience and protect Canadians and their interests. Canadians can be assured that CSIS and the government take these threats very seriously. Both the RCMP and CSIS have phone numbers and online reporting mechanisms that are monitored 24/7 for anyone who would like to report a threat to national security, including foreign interference. To conclude, foreign interference is a rising challenge for the whole of our society. However, I want to assure this committee that CSIS is steadfast in its commitment to keep all Canadians safe. With that, I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. And so to questions we will go to Mr. Chong for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing to continue this hearing that we're having today. My question concerns both the protection of national security, whether it's being threatened by foreign interference, and the protection of our intellectual property as it's threatened by espionage. To my knowledge, in the last several years, only one person has been investigated and charged with any one of these two things. It was a Hydro-Quebec employee who was charged just a short time ago for allegedly stealing secrets, intellectual property, to transfer to the People's Republic of China. So I don't want to talk about anything that isn't active and ongoing, that is anything that concerns an active investigation. But what I want to point out is that that's the only case I know of that has led to the arrest of someone, the laying of charges, and a prosecution. I don't know of anything else. But yet I read in newspapers every day, every month, that our closest Five Eyes intelligence allies are actually arresting agents of China in their territory and charging them. You know, just in the last year in the United States, May 18th, 4 PRC intelligence officers charged with spying on prominent dissidents, Hong Kong activists, and pro-democracy activists. October 24th, United States charges 13 in 3 separate cases regarding foreign interference and espionage. October 20th, 6 charged as illegal agents of the People's Republic of China in the United States. November 17th, U.S. court sentences PRC spy to 20 years for stealing trade secrets. In the United Kingdom a year ago, MI5 coming forward with naming and shaming Christine Lee for being an agent of the PRC in the UK Parliament. The United Kingdom expelling just over 2 years ago 3 journalists that were posing as journalists that were actually spies and agents of the PRC. But yet here in Canada, I don't hear anything other than this one case that I heard about 3 days ago. So maybe you can tell us if I'm wrong, if there are any other cases that have led to prosecution.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Yes, you are correct. In December 2021, the RCMP federal policing program led to a charge of breach of trust by public officer against Mr. Wang.
So I appreciate that answer. And here's the other thing I'm concerned about. An internal report was made public in April of last year. In that report, it came to light that RCMP officers refused to catch and release an individual that was a threat to our national security. So how can the public have, that was notified by CSIS. CSIS called up the RCMP and said, we need to thwart an active national security threat, an active threat to the intellectual property, to the national security of this country. And we are requesting that the RCMP catch and release this individual. And the RCMP refused. And that came out in this report in April of last year. So how is the public supposed to have confidence in the ability of our law enforcement to protect the national security of this country, to protect us against espionage, when in the last several years, while our closest Five Eyes allies have arrested and charged and convicted many, many people, named and shamed people, we've only had one case that's led to a prosecution. And meanwhile, we get internal reports that the RCMP and CSIS aren't even cooperating on an investigation, on a catch and release, on sharing information. How is the public supposed to have confidence that this country is protecting their national security and protecting us against espionage?
Mr. Chair, if I may continue answering the first question that the honourable member had, I do in fact have two other examples of where individuals were charged by the RCMP, one of them being in November of 2019 when a now former employee of Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada, who worked at the facility in Swift Current, was charged with a number of criminal code offenses: breach of trust by public officer, fraud over $5,000, possession of proceeds of crime over $5,000. And then in November of 2022...
Just to clarify, on that first case, was that in relation to a threat to national security or a threat to intellectual property?
The allegations were in relation to theft of intellectual property,
Okay.
which falls under the National Security Program.
I got you. And then what's the second case?
And the next one is in November of 2022. I'm sorry, in December of 2021. The Federal Police and National Security Program charged an ex-employee of the Canadian Space Agency. That was Mr. Zhang of Brossard, Quebec. He was charged in relation to illegal activities carried out alongside his duties at the Canadian Space Agency. We initiated an investigation in October 2019 after receiving information from the CSA's Departmental Security. So Mr. Zhang allegedly used his status as a CSA engineer to negotiate agreements for the installation of satellite station facilities in Iceland. So he allegedly acted on behalf of a Chinese aerospace company, and the matter is currently before the courts.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr.
so
Chong.
thank you for
Your
those elucidation
time
of those three cases, but
has
the other question I wouldn't mind
expired.
having answered at some point during this hearing.
At some point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
There will be other opportunities. Mr. Chang, now to you for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the witnesses for being here tonight, and it's a long night for all of you. In regards, when you mentioned earlier in the opening remarks about threats and foreign interference, how prevalent are they, threats and foreign? And I understand you just said 3 people being charged. We had 3 incidents in the last little while. But how prevalent is threats and foreign interference in Canada by foreign actors?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So the RCMP National Security Program receives a number of allegations regarding foreign actor interference and will investigate every allegation or complaint received. In doing so, we will collaborate with our domestic and international partners. We will engage with the communities. We share information, and we investigate these allegations to the fullest of our abilities.
Thank you.
I can try to answer your question as well, if
Yes,
you
please.
like, through you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, I mean, certainly from a service perspective, our assessment of the threat is that it's increasing without a doubt over the last 5 to 10 years, certainly with the geopolitical environment, technology. We're seeing more foreign interference. We're seeing more espionage, hostile state activity here in Canada, in particular being perpetrated by the People's Republic of China, but there are others as well. And it's certainly our estimation that that threat environment will continue to increase in the years ahead.
Thank you so much. Mr. Fisher, in follow-up to your answer, when he's saying others as well, is other countries he talking about, or?
Yes, although China certainly dominates in this space, Russia is known to be active in foreign interference, as well as other countries such as Iran. Those are sort of the three countries we speak publicly of. There are a very short list beyond that, but those are the most persistent and worrisome threats that we're seeing today.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. In regards to the Chinese police stations, do we have information on other countries having these Chinese police stations, and are we working with other governments in regards to tracking and stopping these police stations?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, I can. We are working with other governments as well. It is very much, although there were the ones that were reported in Toronto and in Vancouver, there was others reported around the globe as well. And unfortunately, this is an experience that's shared by many countries right now as well.
So, would that be with our Five Eye partners? We working with them in collaboration to making sure to eliminate these police stations?
Yes, we're in. We're in communication with the Five Eye partners about this issue and about ongoing investigations.
And are you aware of any instances where Canadians have been pressured or harassed by these foreign agents?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. As mentioned previously, the RCMP will receive numerous allegations, and we follow up on every allegation or complaint received from the public or other sources of information. And so we will investigate. And I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
The question was, with the police station, have there been harassment against our citizens by them, like pressure?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Yes, so we will investigate all the allegations of harassment and intimidation, as this is not tolerated by the RCMP or the government of Canada. Although I'm not at liberty to reveal any specific details of ongoing investigations, but if the RCMP receives complaints or allegations of intimidation or harassment, we will definitely be investigating those allegations.
Thank you very much. But your answer was just generalizing it by saying if we receive any calls like that. But do we have information on any harassment being conducted against our citizens?
Sorry, if I can just clarify, are you talking specific to the alleged police stations?
That's right.
Yeah. So I think to maintain the integrity of the investigation as well as the security and the privacy of those that will be.
Sorry, can I just interject there for a moment?
Sorry?
Can I interject there?
Yeah.
I'm not asking you for pertinent information on anybody in particular. I'm just asking to see if there has been actual harassment or threatening being done. I understand you investigating police stations, but has there been actual threatening or harassment done? I'm not asking for a specific investigation itself.
Right. And I guess the best way that I can answer that is to say as my colleagues have mentioned earlier, when we went forward overtly when we're doing interviews and things like that, that was part of the overall investigation into the existence of the alleged police stations. So I really don't want to confirm details of what we've learned as a result of that investigation.
Thank you very much. Do I have some more time, Mr. Chair? One more question. Have the Canadian government reached out to the Chinese government in regards to these police stations? My final question.
I wouldn't know that answer. Do you know? I don't know that answer.
Thank you for the question. Currently, we haven't engaged with the Chinese government.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll now go to Mr. Trudel for 6 minutes or less.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I'm not calling into question your skills or your competency. I'm sure you're competent officers, but China is in the headlines a lot nowadays. That can't be denied. There was the spy balloon, the police stations, interference in elections. This is major. It's in the newspapers, in question period. The minister has been made aware of it. We talked earlier about the employee at Hydro-Quebec that made the headlines. You're police officers who are involved in this, and you're seeing these headlines. Surely this affects you in terms of your you don't want that to occur on your watch. It would affect your pride in a sense. It's like having drug trafficking in front of a municipal police station. You wouldn't like to see that. It seems to me that China is, in a sense, playing with you in broad daylight, and that's a bit embarrassing. Now, quite clearly, based on the answers we've heard thus far, there's something that Canada's just not doing, tools that we just don't have to deal with these people, because we're seeing it in the headlines day in, day out, and we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel as to when this is going to end. And I imagine in the face of these issues, you are having frequent meetings with politicians, with ministers, with stakeholders that are making representations to you and vice versa. They're asking you what tools you need out in the field, what you're missing to prevent Chinese spy balloons and making the headlines that there be spies discovered and Canada's sensitive affairs being revealed for all and sundry. So what do other jurisdictions do? What's missing in Canada's toolbox? And what do you say to politicians when you meet with them, with the Minister of Public Safety who appeared before us earlier, for example? We talked earlier about the registry of foreign agents, and that is one potential tool that might be helpful. What are other tools that you need that you can speak to so that China stops making the headlines and is making a mockery of our police and intelligence services?
Merci pour vos commentaires.
Thank you for your comments and your questions, Mr. Trudel. Indeed, we are concerned by the threats of foreign interference and the scope of those threats that we're seeing increasingly of late. We take all threats seriously. It's a top priority dealing with these threats at the RCMP. The threat of foreign interference is substantial and being investigated fully by the RCMP. We're working with our domestic and international partners to get our hands on all the information that we need to carry out investigations of all and every foreign threat. We maximise and leverage the tools that we have at our disposal. Now, we do need additional tools. Well, there you have it. What are those additional tools that you need? You are working with the tools that you have at your disposal, but you seem to be telling me that you don't have enough tools. What are those tools that you need? Well, there are a number of charges that we leverage currently under the Criminal Code, as I alluded to earlier, and other federal legislation that we rely on to investigate. foreign interference. We are always interested in the proposal of additional tools. Well, sorry, you're sort of circumventing my question. What other tools specifically? Response. Well, and I'm asking this question of all the panelists. Well, tools that would help us with the public safety. And if we are consulted and asked for our input on new tools, of course we will provide that input. Well, can you elaborate here? Can you tell us what is missing? What Canada's not doing that other countries are doing? Ireland, Netherlands, they closed these infamous foreign police stations. How can they do it and yet we are unsuccessful in doing so? What does Ireland, what do the Netherlands have in terms of tools that we're lacking? Response, I don't have any specific details in relation to the Netherlands, but what I can tell you with the reality of geopolitics, China is on the rise. It has a very aggressive stance, and, that's something that all Western countries are facing around the globe. Now, one can't necessarily draw the conclusion that amounts to vulnerability here in Canada. Obviously, it's a cause for frustration, but there are a lot of tools available to us. Now, we have cross-cutting tools, if you will, across a number of areas: cybersecurity, the protection of democratic institutions, legislation against foreign interference, espionage. We have a lot of tools, and the threat is constantly evolving, of course, and we have to tweak and fine-tune our tools. We can't go into greater detail, but that's what we want, the details. We'd like specifics. That's why we're here, for the specifics, you see.
It's expired, and now it's Ms. McPherson's turn for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here tonight and sharing this expertise with us. I know it is a late night for this. I'm trying to understand how exactly this is all working. So how the local policing interacts with the RCMP, interacts with CSIS, interacts with the government, with Global Affairs Canada. It seems to me that there's a bit of a challenge or a bit of a problem in how that information is being shared. I don't know how effective those communications are. So I'm really interested on how that works. So if a threat comes in, for example, to you, Mr. Fisher, how do you ensure that Global Affairs is apprised of it, that the RCMP is apprised of it? Who takes responsibility for that? How does that work? And don't worry, gang, I'll get to you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So I'd say to that question that insofar as the flow of information and intelligence between the security agencies, CSIS, the RCMP, Public Safety, Communication Security Establishment, and others, it's very good. It's very healthy. There are multiple fora that meet regularly, weekly, to discuss these intelligence matters. So I'd say to you, within the Government of Canada, within the National Security Establishment, there is very broad awareness and understanding of the threats, general and specific, that we're facing. When it comes to actually transitioning intelligence to evidence that would allow police and enforcement to lay charges, that is a challenge, and that was alluded to in the previous panel. But there are other avenues, other tools that we can use. For example, for the service, we have our threat reduction mandate. So, we may perceive foreign influence activity occurring within a community or against a certain official, and within the national security community, we would discuss that and talk about what the best method is to address it. And it might not be charges. It might be the service using its threat reduction mandate to reduce the threat, which we'll never hear about publicly and we can never talk about publicly, but it occurs, and it does occur within the foreign influence activity threat.
Thank you. And I guess, Mr. Fisher, so for example, you did talk about there being a phone number. You were here when I asked the Commissioner about how often that phone number is being accessed. I always have a bit of a concern because it's quite easy to put a phone number out into the public. It's not always that easy to deal with the calls that come in on that phone. is the data being collected from that phone number? Do you have the information of who is utilizing it? You have to believe that we're all quite worried, especially when we now hear that there is conceivably, of course, we always suspected the foreign interference with regards to Russia and Iran. Is that data being collected, and do the impacted communities have that information? Is this information staying up here and not getting down to the impacted communities? Because we're hearing a very different story from people who are living in these communities.
So I try to answer that a couple of ways. In terms of data on our 1-800 number, I mean, that's something I'd have to get back to the committee on. I'd say probably the more useful activity that we conduct is actual engagement with the community. So it's not a number that they necessarily can call, which, although there is one, it's actively going out into the communities through our regions and the big cities across Canada, sitting down with community associations and leaders and talking to them, usually in an unclassified setting, about the threat, sensitizing them to the threat, and letting them know that there's someone they can call if they need to. In spite of what people might think, the service is not everywhere, watching everything, and we actually rely heavily on communities to tell us when they see something that's amiss. So part of it is building that connection with the communities. Part of it is educating them with regards to what they need to be aware of and looking for. And we've got a number of publications that we put out there that talk about foreign influence activity and the flags that people should be looking for. And if they see them, giving us a call and meeting with us or talking to us on the phone or however they want to interact with us.
If that was perhaps to happen with the local police, that there is a pathway for that information to get to you.
Yeah, I mean, certainly at an operational regional level, the same kind of connectivity that you see here in Ottawa between the RCMP and CSIS would exist in the field. So, for example, I think it was mentioned that our insets are investigating some of the front office police stations. So CSIS is embedded within these inset organizations.
And CSIS has all the resources they need to do this work. You might want to be careful how you answer that, because this will go to the Parliament, of course.
CSIS is continuously reprioritizing and reallocating internally to face the threats that we're dealing with. The threat environment's evolving. 20 years ago, it was all about counterterrorism. Today, you'll hear our director say publicly that the number one strategic threat to Canada is espionage and foreign interference, and we've adjusted internally to put significant resources into those investigations.
Have the resources been sufficient for the changes?
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. We'll go now to Mr. Chong for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to return to this issue of foreign interference. The three cases were mentioned. The 2019 case with the Canadian Space Agency that involved an employee acting on behalf of a Chinese aerospace company. The 2019 case that was mentioned regarding an Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada employee that was acting on behalf of a Chinese university and an Italian pasta company. And then more recently, the Hydro-Quebec employee case that involved the espionage. But it seems to me that all these three cases involve espionage and not foreign interference in the form of illegal police stations, intimidation of citizens, and pro-democracy groups and human rights activists. That involves things like targeting democratic institutions, political parties, candidates, and I guess the source of frustration that I and many MPs have is that a lot of this stuff doesn't. First of all, we've not heard of any criminal investigations that have led to prosecution with respect to foreign interference in the form of intimidation of citizens, targeting of political parties or candidates in respect of illegal police stations. We've not heard of any investigations that have led to charges, yet we hear of this happening amongst our Five Eyes allies. And then for the stuff that doesn't rise to the level of criminality, we're not even told who's being targeted. You know, the Prime Minister's brief that 11 candidates in the 2019 election were targeted by the People's Republic of China, but nobody tells us who the 11 candidates are. And so we're not even getting information to help equip ourselves to defend ourselves, defend our institutions yet. You know, other Five Eyes allies are using sunlight and transparency to do exactly that. And then, you know, last year we read about a lack of interagency cooperation where, you know, the agencies aren't sharing information. CSIS has got an active investigation that's apparently a threat to our national security, calls up the RCMP, says this individual or individuals need to be arrested, and the RCMP refuses. So when you put this all together, can you understand why we're concerned about what is seemingly a lack of institutional capacity to defend our national security and our intellectual property? So, you know, I guess one question is, has this interagency rivalry between CSIS and the RCMP that was highlighted in a report, an internal report of last April, has that been resolved? Has the lack of information sharing within the Government of Canada been resolved?
So, thanks for the question. I don't know which case you're specifically referring to, and I can only speak from my Ontario perspective, but we're in constant communication with the service, and the information sharing back and forth between our two agencies is positive.
It's a case that dates back several years.
Yeah.
It was so serious that an internal investigation was conducted that led to an internal report that came to light in April of last year. So it wasn't that long ago. It was about 8-9 months ago. In this report, it was highlighted that CSIS requested the RCMP to carry out arrests in order to thwart an active threat to our national security, and that the RCMP officers involved refused to do so. So clearly, whatever threat was active at the time wasn't thwarted, because the RCMP officers involved quit the premise, quit the situation, rather than carry out what CSIS had requested. And the report concluded that part of the problem was that the RCMP officers didn't feel that they had enough information from CSIS to make the arrest. And so, you know, this is an internal report. It was pretty public. It was published by the CBC, reported by the CBC, I believe, in April of last year. So the simple question is, has this interagency rivalry been resolved so that if there are active threats to national security that don't rise to the level of a criminal prosecution, but require some other techniques, that our police and security agencies are integrated and functioning so that these other tools, such as catch and release, can be executed upon to protect this country's citizens? So that's my question.
Actually, I will ask the witnesses to maybe work that answer into some of their follow-up comments, because, Mr. Chong, your time has expired. We'll now go to Mr. Fragaskatos for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here tonight. Mr. Fisher, in your opening statement, you mentioned a document, I think you said, Foreign Interference in Me. I believe it is a document, correct, that you were talking about?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, can you expand on that? What exactly was
that? Absolutely. So I think it's Foreign Interference in You. I think it's the way it's titled. And it's a document we put out, I believe it was last year. It's unclassified. It's translated into a number of languages, and it's meant to sensitize communities to the foreign interference threat. So it talks about what to look for. It talks about some of the techniques that our adversaries use in advancing foreign interference. So, for example, cultivation of targets, elicitation of information. It talks about cyber attacks that are used as well as part of foreign influence activity, financing, that sort of thing. So it's available for all, and I think it's on our website as well.
Okay, so certainly in principle, it sounds like a very worthwhile thing to pursue. but how is the messages that are contained in that report? How is that communicated more broadly to the public? Are the public is that the message simply to go on the website and find it? Because, you know, in the age that we live in, distraction is all around us. People are very unlikely. Look, I respect the work that you do, so this is not necessarily a criticism, but I am a bit perplexed as to how people are supposed to learn about this if they, you know, aren't being directed, or is there efforts to engage community leaders that have wider networks, perhaps, so that they can help spread the message? Otherwise, it just remains on a website, right, collecting, you know, dust, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Chair. So it's not a static tool, something that we've just posted on our website. It would be a document that in our regions, when we meet with community leaders, community associations, we would bring that document with us. And we would share it there. We try to sort of publicize it in forums such as this. We're certainly doing more public speaking as well at very senior levels with our director and others. So, you know, slowly but surely, we're trying to get the word out there, and this is just one document that we would bring along with us when we're engaging with communities and partners and leave on the table when we leave.
As I say, sounds interesting. Sounds something that would be worthwhile for Canadians to delve into. I'm even thinking, you know, it wouldn't be out of place if someone was on, you know, a community radio station or something like that, talking about what the document contains. Right now, it's, you know, we're telling people to go online and find it, and I'm not sure there's a lot of utility with that, with great respect. Ms. Soper, if I did have another question for you, or Mr. Giguère, if I could, but it sounded like you had an opinion on that.
Well, I would just add, in another context, we also have a researchers portal that's housed through Innovation Science and Economic Development that also provides lots of rich information to the research community, the academic community, about how to safeguard the research. We use that in complement with seminars that we send out to universities in order to meet with students, researchers,
yes.
So that we push out the message that way.
Understood.
So it's another, we try to tailor our products to specific communities that will have an interest in it.
Thank you very much. You won't have much time to answer this. However, there is continued interest and focus among many, including, I think, members of this committee, on this question of a Foreign Agents Act, excuse me. So this goes to either you or Mr. Giguère from Public Safety. Is there something already in place in Canadian law that would achieve the same goal, thus preventing that kind of an advance forward, or not? I'm just thinking in terms of redundancy. If Canadian law allows for, you know, objectively the aims of a Foreign Agents Act already somehow, then all this talk about the need to implement that kind of a law might be moot. But do you have any perspective on that?
Well, the Foreign Agent Registry is a tool of transparency, above all, and so there's obviously the Lobbying Act, which is very constrained and applies to very specific conditions. So yes, no, at this point there's no alternative. So the Foreign Agent Registry would fill a specific gap in that regard.
Just wanted to be certain on that.
Thank you, Mr. Fragascatos. Over to you, Mr. Trudel, for 2.5 minutes.
Half only. Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. Okay. So I will go. Merci, Christophe.
Well, I don't know why I'm speaking English, but I'll proceed quickly. So we were speaking about tools earlier. The director of the FBI, Mr. Ri, declared, I don't know when exactly, that the Chinese Communist Party has a habit of exporting its repression to the United States. We know this. Harassment, surveillance, blackmail are part of the uncoordinated measures being taken by the People's Republic of China regarding Chinese foreign nationals that don't approve of the regime, and there are many of them. He added that the FBI is discussing this issue with its foreign partners. So, are you discussing this issue with the United States of steps to take? Is there any coordination with the United States? Is there any discussions underway with other countries aside from the United States? I'll ask all panelists. Response. Well, yes, evidently we do coordinate closely with our Five Eyes partners, who are our traditional partners. We also have a dialogue within the G7 and our NATO partners. And these discussions are, of course, ongoing on specific themes. There are a number of subcommittees and fora that have been struck where we can discuss targeted issues such as interference, cybersecurity. So indeed, we're well aligned with our colleagues in terms of sharing information and the sharing of tools and analyses. We try to work together when possible. It's not always easy. A bit of a trick question to finish up. What about this spy balloon? Was it a meteorological one, or was it indeed a spy balloon? Well, obviously, for operational reasons, I can't give you specifics. But if it was a meteorological balloon, you wouldn't be saying that, would you? You'd tell us that it was just a weather balloon. Response. Well, I think the Americans did say that this balloon had spy functions, espionage functions, and that they shot it down for very specific reasons without getting into too much detail. Thank you.
McPherson now for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I said that I would get back to you on my next round. I don't have very much time, but you know, as we think about the connections between local police, CSIS, RCMP, you know, the obvious goal here is that we are identifying when there is a risk at play, we are finding a way to stop that risk, and we are protecting Canadians and people in Canada from that risk. Is there training that is being undertaken with local police so that they are able to play that key role?
So I'll speak to that question. The policing landscape of the GTA is such that there's a lot of police services together in that geographical area, with us doing the national security function. And the model of our inset units is such that there's integrated partners within there. And the other thing that certainly we have in GTA inset is an integrated intake and assessment team. So when you see, so that not only are we getting complaints from the other national security agencies, but we'll also get some that come in through the police forces of jurisdiction that will come to us. And so there is that consistent analysis and triage of files, and with that there goes some training and learning with the management so that they're aware of what to look for.
What about the police officers that are actually like the local police officers? And let's go out of the GTA because that's a very complex example. The Edmonton Police Service, because I think we can assume that there are probably situations across the country, not just in Toronto and Vancouver. I think we can assume that there are situations happening in other cities. Edmonton Police Service gets a complaint. How does that get to you? How does that get to Mr. Fisher? How does that get resolved to ensure that the people making that complaint are being protected? And where is the training in place to ensure that those police officers know how to manage that?
So the inset model across the country has those, has the partnerships within them with the local police and the RCMP as well. And with that becomes awareness of the files that they're working on, and that communication that's more easily between the police service of jurisdiction and that inset unit as well.
So Mr. Peggs, if I have a citizen in Edmonton who has a concern, who perhaps is a Uyghur activist or a Hong Kong activist, they contact the local police. The local police will have had no training on how to manage this, but this will be escalated to the RCMP. Is that how I understand that?
I don't think I don't know what the training has been with all the police agencies and what there is, but there should be that awareness, and I think this is still very much a work in progress with the awareness of what they're looking for, because as you can, I'm sure, understand, what can sometimes appear to be just an initial criminal code complaint could be something
more serious, which is why it's important.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. It sounds like maybe a little quick audit needs to happen there just to see who knows what about what. We'll go now to Ms. Dancho for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of my questions are for Director General Fisher. What is your role? What is the role of CSIS concerning these alleged Chinese police stations operating in Canada? What role does CSIS play?
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, as has been said here, the RCMP is leading the investigation, but that doesn't mean that we're not also looking at it. I mean, I can't say we are or we're not in an unclassified forum. But certainly, any allegation of foreign influence activity, in particular one that is seemingly so bold, would certainly get our attention. And I'm speaking in the hypothetical. You know, we would perform our own sort of checks while leaving the RCMP to lead the criminal investigation from their side. So we certainly would take an interest in it.
Certainly. Would it have been CSIS that would have been first, in a hypothetical situation, first been the agency of government that would have been made aware of these police stations? Would it have been your agency first, or would the RCMP have been notified, or was it Global Affairs when they read the Charles Burton article in the Globe and Mail? In a hypothetical situation, would it have been CSIS that learned about this first?
So again, I won't speak to these police stations specifically. From my experience in the national security environment, information like this can come in through various channels. It could come through the service. It could come through police channels. It could come through foreign intelligence partners or police partners. So there's no one route into the government when something like this becomes known. But once it is known by one agency, it's very quickly shared amongst the community so that we can talk about it and talk about sort of the best approach to managing it.
The community being the government agencies, RCMP, yourselves. Okay. And then to share that information with our Five Eyes or other allies, would Global Affairs take on that responsibility, or would CSIS take on that responsibility of gathering information if these are operating in another country and sharing what we know about them if they are or are not in ours? Would it be CSIS?
So quite often where there's a criminal investigation into something that's threat related, there's a parallel intelligence investigation, and in the intelligence world, that information is shared. And I mean, going to an earlier question, talking about interactions with our Five Eyes partners and other intelligence agencies, there's a very, very robust conversation that goes on in intelligence channels on issues of foreign influence activity. So we would be comparing notes. We would be talking to one another in those intelligence channels.
So if Commissioner Lucky did verify or confirm for the committee, or actually provided, I think it was news, it was the first time that we were made aware of this, that there were uniformed RCMP officers, sort of, she didn't use the word station, but they were at the Vancouver location, sort of, she didn't say gathering intelligence, but she said that they were there to sort of disrupt, I think the word that she used. And so if you're gathering intelligence, are you then sharing it with CSIS, who would then share it, as he's just outlined, with our allies? Is that how that flow of information works?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think a couple things. The uniform presence in the marked vehicles was at the Toronto locations.
Oh, I thought you said Vancouver.
Yeah,
My
no,
mistake.
it's okay. They were at the Toronto locations, and the purpose of that was essentially to show the community that we were doing something about this, to try and encourage that reporting to come in.
So if reporting did come in, is the flow of information then to Director General Fisher or CSIS, someone in CSIS, who then can share that with our allies and sort of compare notes? Is that how that flow of information works?
So typically speaking, all of the information that we gather is also shared with the service as well.
Okay, and you would confirm that?
I would, yeah. It's easier going in that direction than the other direction, which touches on a question from a previous question from a member, and that's where we get into and it was
Can I
referenced.
just confirm what you mean there? I'm sorry. Do you mean sort of CSIS operatives gathering that information?
So the flow of information is easier from a law enforcement context into an intelligence realm rather than vice versa. Going from intelligence into law enforcement is difficult because of the intelligence to evidence issue, which is a long-standing challenge within the Canadian context. Actually, all of our partners face very similar challenges, and that comes, to sort of how police forces handle evidence and their requirements and their thresholds. It also touches on our requirement to protect sources, in particular from our Five Eyes partners and others.
That may beg further questions, but there'll be opportunities to do that a little bit later on. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'll direct my questions to Ms. Gauvin. With a family name such as Gauvin, I'm sure you have family in Acadia. Now, earlier in your opening remarks, you said that you would like to speak with all those people who feel intimidated or threatened by these police stations and those running it. And you referred to students too. Do you actively seek out these individuals, or do you allow them to come to you? You did refer to the 1-800 number. It would be good to hear these answers in French. What is the process in place to collect information with students, for example? Do you go and meet with them in universities, or do you allow them to come to you if they believe that there is a police service station, for example, that is located in their region? Well, thank you very much for your question, Mr. Cormier. Yes, indeed. I'd answer yes on both counts. In fact, we do encourage folks proactively to come to us and speak out, to make complaints and inform us of any intimidation or threats that they may undergo. Now, we also engage proactively with the communities themselves, including universities and academic and other institutions that may be affected by foreign interference. And clearly, yes, as part of this engagement with these institutions and students, we keep them abreast, we sensitize them, we inform them of the potential of foreign threats by way of a number of vehicles that are used to proffer those threats. And also, we arm them, in a sense, with information. We report on the incidents and we seek to protect them actively. Question: when you speak to those students or other members of the Chinese community, I read a number of articles that some of them fear for their safety and also for that of their families that are still in China. Do you get a keen sense of that when you speak to them? Are they open, transparent, forthcoming when they talk to you about threats and intimidation that they are subject to, or do they seem reluctant to disclose and report on that? Well, in our engagement with individuals, indeed, we absolutely do try and get as much information out of them as possible. And it is possible sometimes that certain people are reluctant due to a fear of retaliation on the part of these foreign actors. And at the RCMP, we're fully cognizant of the fact that there are some family members of those individuals who are still in China and also back home in Canada who may be subject to intimidation, threats, and so on. But we do encourage them to share any useful information, and as part of our investigations, we take all of that information into consideration. Excellent. Now, a question for you and for the other panelists, if I may. I saw what China has said about these police stations, and they're saying that they're not, in fact, police service stations, but centres run by volunteers, Chinese foreign nationals that live abroad. What's your response to that? As French isn't my first language, I'd prefer to respond in English, if I may.
Perfect.
Now I just got to remember the question after I got that out. Yeah, so unfortunately, the facts that we've learned through our investigation to maintain the integrity of it, I cannot share it with you today, as we want to make sure that we can proceed with this investigation down the road to try and get to our prosecutions. I'm afraid I can't answer that question.
Et peut-être ma dernière question.
Now, perhaps my last question in that case for the RCMP representatives. I know that the RCMP has a lot of files. It has its work cut out for it. But to your mind, where is this police station in terms of your priorities? Is it the bottom of your priority list, at the top?
So I can say that we take this very seriously, and it is one of our priority matters, and we're continuing to investigate it. We have actually moved some resources into that unit to bolster that investigation so that we can keep it going, so it remains a priority for us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cormier. To Mr. Chong now for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I just want to continue the line of questioning that MP Dancho had and that I asked earlier that never got a response, which is this April 2022 internal report, which highlighted, an apparent lack of cooperation in the integrated national security enforcement team, and where information, intelligence to evidence wasn't flowing, and as a result, arrests were not made, and an active threat was not thwarted. So my simple question is, has this been addressed? Or is this an ongoing issue? And if so, what should be done by Parliament, by government, by the Cabinet to address this lack of interagency cooperation when it comes to protecting our national security?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair, through you. So, first, I'd just like to emphasize that certainly from my perspective, I think the service perspective in general, the cooperation between us and the RCMP and the rest of the national security community is very sound, very good, very healthy. There was a time that wasn't the case. I think we'd all agree, but we've come a long, long way. We've done a lot of work to define sort of our lanes and define ways that we can help each other in terms of executing our mandate. So I just want to emphasize that point. And I don't know how far back this document goes. It's potentially back to days when things weren't so healthy. But today things are very healthy. Intelligence to evidence is an issue. It's something that the government has recognized as such. And has been putting a lot of effort into trying to address it. It's not a straightforward issue at all. But I also wouldn't want to leave the impression that it's the only avenue. And again, I don't know the particulars of the case that you're citing. But it wouldn't be unusual in such circumstances for the Mounties to tell CSIS, you know what, you're not giving us enough information for us to pursue our own investigation. We'd have to go back, look at ourselves, and see whether there's perhaps something we can do under our own threat reduction mandate. And I'm not saying that happened.
Yeah.
I'm just saying
Well,
that would be not an unusual conversation.
Thank you for that answer. Just quickly, we're talking about foreign interference today in the form of police stations and other forms of interference. Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, said just before Christmas that TikTok is a threat to U.S. national security and a threat in the form of threat to national security in two forms. First, it's potentially a real threat with respect to espionage, the ability of TikTok to gather vast amounts of data to track and surveil persons in the U.S. And secondly, it's a threat in the form of foreign interference because the recommendation algorithms could be used to attack democratic institutions, parties, candidates, during and in between elections in serving up massive amounts of disinformation. It is the #1 app worldwide that's been downloaded, and it's the #1 app amongst a younger generation of our citizens. And so can you tell us what CSIS assessment is of TikTok in respect of espionage and its ability to track Canadians through the vast amounts of data to collect, and secondly, its threat in respect of foreign interference in the fact that the recommendation algorithms could be manipulated to spread disinformation, to attack our parties, our elections, and our institutions.
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So I wouldn't comment specifically on TikTok and what our assessment may or may not be of that company. But I mean, I can certainly confirm in a general way that what you've said about social media being a platform, a potential platform that does get exploited for foreign influence activity being true. It's both a platform where vast amounts of data can be collected, personal identifying information. It can assist the adversary in honing in their own targeting in terms of foreign influence activity. And it's also a vector for messaging and narratives that are friendly to, supportive of the authoritarian regime, while at the same time suppressing voices that may be contrary to that. So we see that in social
Would
media.
you recommend that TikTok be banned from Government of Canada devices and from the Parliament of Canada's devices?
I wouldn't recommend that, Mr. Chair. The service provides assessments and advice to government and decision makers, and that sort of thing is done in a confidential setting.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. Mr. Dubourg, it's over to you now for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. And c'est à mon tour maintenant de...
It's my turn to welcome our witnesses who are here this evening, and thank you for being here at such a late hour for this important study that we're conducting. Now, what we can say right off the bat is that we know that there is an investigation underway, so there are some questions that are off limits and it's difficult for you to answer them, but I'll take a stab at it nevertheless. Now, since it came out in the media, this whole issue of these infamous police service stations, are you in a position to say whether or not those activities have reduced at those 3 or 4 centres, such as threats against individuals?
Encore merci pour la question.
Once again, thanks for the question, and I'll respond in English, if I may.
No, I'm not in a position to comment on that, unfortunately, today for you. Anything that I would say with respect to what we've determined makes up the fabric of the investigation, and I can't comment on that, so I apologize for that.
Merci, merci.
Thank you all the same. A second question in that case. Earlier we spoke with Ms. Lucky about the 1-800 telephone hotline. Can you tell us what kind of threats Canadians are being subjected to? Speaking generally, of course, by way of this 1-800 number.
Merci pour votre
Thank you for your question. Well, the complaints are varied. I don't have data to tell you specifically the proportion of certain complaints vis-à-vis others, but I can go back to the RCMP to get that data and submit a written response to you if you so desire. Well, thank you very much. Yes, and in relation to those threats, I understand that there are Canadians of Chinese origin who are being threatened. But oftentimes, there are other communities that they're supporting members of the Chinese community. Are they too subject to threats on the part of those operating those police stations?
So anything that we've learned with respect to the police stations, the alleged police stations themselves is not something I'm going to be able to comment on. I can speak in generalities about the types of investigations and things like that, but I can't speak about anything specific to the police stations.
And let me try one more question. I'd like to know about those, let's say, police individuals. And do you know if they come from China or they are already people in Canada, or do they just arrive in Canada? Do they were installed in Canada? Or last thing, can we link them to the ambassador of in China in Canada?
I think to get the answers to those questions, I think we need to let the investigation run its course, and so that the investigators can do what they have to do, yes. And then some of those answers will become known. But as of now, I can't say anything about it.
Yes, thank you so much, and good luck.
Thank you.
In your job. Thank you, Chair.
Maybe, Mr. DeBorg, you can sign on and go and ask those questions directly and find out for yourself. Very good. Mr. Trudel, it's over to you for 2.5 minutes.
Now, do you know the organization Safeguard Defenders? Well, we're told that there are Chinese service centers, not-for-profits, that provide assistance for the poor, food, clothing, even housing. And those locations are, in fact, turning into service centers and intelligence hubs in Toronto and Vancouver. I believe there's one in Montreal, or is there? Do you believe that there's any such centre in Montreal, a service centre that deals in intelligence? Any information on that?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Trudel. Well, there are allegations that there may be a so-called police station in the region of Montreal, or rather, if we got wind of that, there would be an investigation conducted, and but you've got no information to that effect to date, none whatsoever. Is that what I'm understanding? Response. Well, right now I can't confirm whether there is an investigation underway or any allegation. Well, what about McGill University, Concordia University? It's often said that there are students there who are working on behalf of the Chinese government. I'm not going to be able to refer to any specific article right now, but are there any Chinese government cells operating in those universities in Montreal, to your knowledge?
Un peu dans le même genre de...
Well, in the same vein as my previous answers, I'll say that were we to receive allegations of that kind, i.e. that there are Chinese cells operating in Canadian universities, well, obviously we would take such allegations very seriously. But you can't confirm that there have been any such allegations to date. Well, no, we want to, of course, protect the integrity of the investigations that are underway. Thanks for coming.
And to wrap up, we'll go to Ms. McPherson for our final 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think, just to be fair, I should ask some questions of our Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness team. Obviously, we've been hearing about online threats. We've been hearing about coercion, all of these harms being directed towards Canadians. What are the policy steps being taken right now to deal with this? What is happening at the policy level?
Thanks for the fairness. because the threat is constantly changing and because the threat landscape is shifting constantly, we just need to make sure that our tools are up to date and adequate. So obviously there's quite a lot of policy work that's being done internally, and we share with the community. We talk with the allies. We we learn constantly, and we are providing advice to government. And this results oftentimes in legislative amendments or proposals. The latest one being changes to the Investment Canada Act that's been tabled by ISED. We're also working on the Prime Minister's requests on a renewal of the cyber strategy. So the threat is multi-vector, and we are looking at the range of policies and tools across the board to come up with an updated policy toolkit.
So in specific, the policies that we would need for the targeting against Canadians. So you talked about the cyber threat, of course, that we are seeing against Canadians, but specifically, what are those policy pieces for the targeting of Canadians?
Well, again, I think what's important to discuss is the fact that the targeting of Canadians happens in many ways. So it's not just someone being harassed on a personal level. It could be what's happening online. It could be through investments and the narratives that are being sort of channeled to social media. So we're trying to take a look at this from a more comprehensive perspective and try to see where are there gaps that we need to address? How do we best invest our money and our efforts and our resources? Where do we need to adjust the legislation? So this is all being done right now, but we're looking at it at a very comprehensive level, and to make sure that we're not forgetting threat vectors that
And I'd like to get much more detail than that, but I don't think that's possible at this time.
The time is up, and I do appreciate that. Thank you. Well, thank you to the panel. I know it's late, but your input has been welcomed and hopefully valuable to our ongoing consideration of this. We have another session coming up on this topic, and what we learned from you probably will lead to more questions to the next group that comes in, so thank you for that. I'd like to thank our two clerks. We're blessed tonight again with two for the price of one. Our analysts, we're down to one instead for the price of two. Our translators, the technical crew and staff, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your work tonight. Meeting is adjourned.